Good morning, Chair. Chair, today we will hear evidence from those who work or who worked at EPUT or its predecessor trusts. This morning, the inquiry will hear from Mr. Stuart Ayres, who has already joined us at the table, who worked at EPUT and its predecessor trusts for over 22 years, including a significant period of time at the Linden Centre. This afternoon, we will hear from Chloe Corston, who is still employed by EPUT, and she is currently a service manager for the Linden Centre. And we will hear today about how care was provided in inpatient units. As with previous days, Chair, there may be aspects of today's evidence that are difficult to listen to. For some people, it may not be possible to sit through the two sessions, and as with other days, anybody in the inquiry room should feel free to leave at any time. I take this opportunity to remind those engaging with the inquiry that emotional support is available for all who require it. Present here again today are emotional support staff from Hestia, an experienced provider of emotional support at these types of hearings. They are currently in the room, can be identified by orange-coloured scarves. There is a private room downstairs where anyone who needs emotional support can talk to Hestia support staff. Or if you prefer, you can speak to a member of the inquiry team and we will put you in touch with the support staff. And we are all wearing purple coloured lanyards, as always. For those following the hearing online, information about the emotional support that is available can be found on the Lampard Inquiry website at lampardinquiry.org.uk. The support tab is on the right top-hand corner. We want everybody engaging with this inquiry in whatever way to feel safe and supported. Chair, that introduction having been made, can I now introduce, please, Mr. Stuart Ayres, who I think now needs to be sworn.
Yeah. Okay. I, Stuart Alan Ayres, do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Thanks.
I think you've said during the course of your affirmation, but please can you state your full name for the record?
Yes, Stuart Alan Ayres.
Mr. Ayres, you've provided two witness statements to the inquiry. One some time ago, dated the 21st of February 2025, and another more recent statement dated the 4th of June 2026.
Yeah.
You have a copy, I hope, of both of those statements in front of you. You signed both of those statements, and each of them bears a statement of truth.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to pause you for a moment because you're nodding.
Oh, sorry.
But it may be for transcript purposes, we'll need you to say yes,
yeah,
clearly.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's my fault, I should have said, but thank you very much. If you just speak clearly and say yes.
Yeah.
Have you had an opportunity to read both of your statements recently?
Yes.
Is there anything you wish to correct in either of those statements?
No.
Do you stand by those statements?
Yes, I do.
I think, as you're aware, both of those statements in full will form your evidence to the inquiry,
yeah.
along, of course, with the answers to the questions you give today. I've got a message to ask you to speak up.
Okay, sorry.
We've just begun, and I know it's,
Yeah.
I know it can be a bit nerve-wracking, but if we just both remember to speak clearly.
Yeah, will do.
Thank you, Mr. Ayres. You are now retired, but for around 27 years, I think, you were a registered mental health nurse.
That's right, yes.
And from 2002 until you retired in 2024, you worked for, firstly, North Essex Partnership NHS Foundation Trust, and then when it merged, you worked for EPUT.
Yes, I did, yeah.
Now, there is, it may seem an obvious thing to say, a distinction, because until that merger, you were working for, I think we should use just the shorthand, NEPT.
Yes.
And then after the merger, you worked for EPUT.
That's right, yeah.
And during the course of your giving evidence, and this is for me as well, can we try and make clear as best we can the periods of time that you're referring to, so that we make sure that we draw the distinction between when you were employed by NEPT and when you were working for EPUT after the merger?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you. In terms of your experience and where your different positions when you were working for EPUT, I think the easiest thing for us to do is have a look at what you put in your statement. And I'm going to ask if paragraph 4 of your witness statement could be put up on the screen, please. Hopefully you've got that as well. And it's really so that we can orientate ourselves with where you were during that 22-year period. So we start off pre the 22 years. October 1997 to April 2002, you worked as a staff nurse at Worley Hospital in Brentwood, which was an adult psychiatric hospital under the Barking, Havering and Brentwood Healthcare Trust.
Yes, that's right.
So that was before you joined NEPT.
Yes.
But that was your first position.
It was. It's where I did my nurse training and then I carried on working there, yeah.
That was going to be my next question.
Okay.
It's where you did your training.
Yeah, it is, yes.
If we look then back at the screen, from April 2002 to October 2003, you worked as a charge nurse at the Christopher unit.
Yes, I did.
Now, that was a brand new unit at the time, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
An adult psychiatric intensive care unit.
Yeah.
And there you were employed by NEPT,
Yes, I was.
as it then was. In October 2003, you moved to work as the ward manager at Finchingfield Ward at the Linden Centre.
That's right, yeah.
And you were there for a period of 6 years.
Yes,
Again, that was an adult acute admissions ward.
it was, yeah.
And that was NEPT.
It was.
From March 2009 to October 2009, and we'll hear about how you moved to this position a little bit later in your evidence, you worked on the trust safeguarding team and had various responsibilities. Just in a sentence, what was your role on that team?
I was a best interest assessor, which was basically assessing people who were placed in various units around the county who was felt that there was deprivation of liberty issues. So I would go and see the person and do a report on their circumstances and their capacity.
So you were undertaking assessments, but would it be right to say you had limited or less direct patient contact?
Yes, yes.
You've written in your statement within EPUT, but in fact that was NEPT as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, I've never really took account of when the changes occurred, to be honest.
That's all right. That's why
yeah.
we're going to we'll make
Yeah.
it clear by doing this
Yeah.
exercise. From November 2009 to June 2014, you worked as a team manager at the Malden Community Health Team in Essex.
That's right.
And that was community-based care.
Yes, it was, yes.
Now, again, we'll come in your evidence to how you interacted with inpatient units and some of the working between community teams and inpatient units, but that was your providing mental health care in the community.
Yes, it was, yes.
From June 2014 to July 2016, you were back on the ward.
I was, yes.
This time you were a charge nurse at the Ardley ward at the Lakes.
Yes.
From August 2016 to May 2019, you explained that you worked as a bank nurse on various teams, including the Access and Assessment Team, the Mental Health Liaison Team, conducting emergency psychiatric assessments at Colchester Hospital. Now, this period crosses with the merger.
Right. Okay.
So, is it NEPT into EPUT then at that stage?
I believe so, yeah.
And is that largely community-based again?
Yes, it is. The assessments weren't in people's homes, but they were in a unit alongside the Lakes, and the A&E liaison team that was doing assessments in Colchester General Hospital. So, yeah, it was assessing patients who were based in the community but not assessing them in their own homes.
May 2019 to March 2021, you worked as a community psychiatric nurse in the psychosis team in Homer Court in Colchester.
Yes.
So again, a community-based role.
Yes, yeah.
From March 2021 and March 2022, you went travelling.
Yes, I did.
April 2022, you're back again, and from then till January 2023, you work as a bank nurse in the community psychiatric nurse in the specialist mental health team in the Gables in Braintree. Again, Gables provides outpatient services and outreach, is that right?
Yeah, I was a community psychiatric nurse with a caseload of patients that I would see in the community.
So again, a community role.
Yes, yeah.
And then the final period of time we have is July 2023 to August 2024, when in effect you're at the same job but in a permanent position.
That's
rather
right,
than
yes.
as bank staff.
Yeah.
All right. So what I wanted to do by looking at your witness statement was identify firstly where it was NEPT and then it was EPUT, and secondly that there are quite significant periods where you're working in the community rather than in an inpatient setting.
Yeah.
And again, whilst before we leave this page, if we look at number 5, your experience is solely with adults.
Yes, it is, yeah.
Thank you, man. We can take that down now. I don't ask you necessarily to look at your witness statement, but I'm going to give the references as we go along in case you'd like to. You also explain, by way of your experience at background, that for about half of your career, half of your working time, you were a trainer for the ethical care, control and restraint on the care programme approach and safeguarding. I'll come back to that in just a moment. And you provided that training for about 20 days a year.
Yes,
Right, so that's
right.
paragraph 6 of your witness statement. As I say, we'll come back to that in a moment. At paragraph 8 of your first statement, you set out what you describe as your 3 key concerns in relation to EPUT.
Okay.
So that's paragraph 8. And we'll come back to the organisation in a moment, but just let's look at your concerns. Your first concern, you say, is EPUT's focus on perception, how the organisation will look if something tragic happened, as opposed to making sure that nothing tragic happened in the first place. And you say that this takes place, I'll come back to that in a moment, to the point where patient care is overlooked.
Yeah.
Your second concern is what you describe as a focus on statistics and blaming individuals when something went wrong for systemic reasons.
Yes.
And your third concern, you say, is a lack of care, understanding and compassion.
Yes.
Now, you make reference to EPUT.
Yeah.
And we've just been through your career and we can see that a significant part of that was, in fact, when you were employed by the predecessor organisation, NEPT. So can I just ask you this? To what extent are those concerns drawn from your experience, early experience, say at the Linden Centre, and from the events following the death of Benjamin Morris, as opposed to your experience overall?
I would say the majority is my concerns when I worked for NEPT. Yes, when I was at the Linden Centre and in the community at Malden.
And in the community, did you say, in Malden?
Yeah.
Can I just ask you this, because you talk in the present tense, you say, when you're talking about focus on perception, you say this takes place to the point where patient care is overlooked. Was it still a feature then of EPUT's approach at the time you retired in 2024?
Yes, it was. In the team I was working in, yes, I believe it was.
Do you have any specific examples, later examples, say, of where EPUT focused on how something would look rather than patient care?
Yeah, I think, for example, where I worked in the community in Braintree, they had a system of grading people's risks using red, amber or green as to be guiding. If someone was rated as red, they would be an urgent risk. And obviously down to green, maybe less of a risk. Meetings would go on for 2 or 3 hours discussing these ratings. And to me, they bore no reflection whatsoever in the way those risks were then managed in the community. So on paper, it would seem that there was a lot of attention paid to looking at people's risks. But in reality, in terms of mitigating their risks, it just didn't match up.
Can I go back then to the care programme approach, which was obviously in place for the majority of the time you worked for NEPT and then EPUT, and your role as a trainer. Now, this inquiry has already heard evidence about the care programme approach, and we understand that following a period of transition, it was replaced by the community mental health framework.
Yeah.
Do you recall roughly when that transition or when that was replaced?
No, I think because there was a period of time when I had kind of a year off, and then I was working as a bank nurse for a couple of years, and I kind of didn't get involved or didn't involve myself in the wider issues around the trust. So I can't really remember when that happened, but I think it was in the last maybe 6 years, maybe. Certainly later on.
With respect to your role as a trainer,
Yeah.
with the ethical care, control and restraint, when mental health care was provided in accordance with the CPA, with the care programme approach, when were you training? Which period of time were you providing that training?
It was while I was Linden Centre, and then when I was in the Malden community, and I think for a short period of time while I was in Ardley Ward as well.
So that's around, what, 2014, 2015?
Up until about then, yeah. Yeah, the ethical care and control restraint training changed quite extensively, and you had to revalidate as a trainer, and I chose not to revalidate.
Were these all part of the same course, or were these individual modules?
No, the control and restraint was a course where we taught staff how to ethically, physically restrain patients, how to de-escalate situations, and issues around how to deal with conflict, whereas the CPA training was more about the paperwork involved in assessing patients, risk assessments and discharge planning. So they were two very separate courses.
And you provided both, did you?
Yeah, I was assistant. The care control and restraint, there was about 25 different trainers, and 2 or 3 of us at a time would train a group of staff. The CPA training, there would be a main trainer, and I would assist the main trainer.
Mr. Ayres, I've just had another post-it to ask us both to slow down. So.
Yeah, I knew I was going to do that. I'm sorry.
No, it's my fault. I'm asking questions quickly, and you've got a lot to say. So we've just got to remember that somebody is transcribing.
Yeah, of course.
So we'll pause from time to time. All right. Sorry, we were just talking about your training. Can I just ask, who was it that you were delivering it to?
Staff.
All staff? Which levels of staff?
Yeah, all levels of staff.
And given the period, can I assume it was face-to-face?
Yes, it was, yeah.
Was it assessed?
Did we pass off our students?
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly the control and restraint was. The CPA training was more about information giving.
Were you assessed? Was it quality controlled?
Each year as a control and restraint trainer, we had to be assessed. Yes, that was an annual revalidation.
You made reference to safeguarding. Was that different or part of the same course?
Yeah, that was very much when there was 2 or 3 of us that were best interest assessors. When we didn't have an assessment that day, we would be asked to go along and just support the person who was doing the training.
In terms of safeguarding, how would you describe then what safeguarding means in the context of inpatient mental health care?
I think it's ensuring that patients' rights are upheld within an organisational setting, making sure in terms of their dignity, their respect, that the law's followed, and that their voice is heard, and that anything that needs to be reported on and be acted on, that process should take place.
Can I just also ask you this, a slightly different question? In terms of the CPA approach, obviously there were policies and procedures in place and available. When you worked at NEPT, was there any guidance by way of practitioner handbook or anything like that circulated to staff to help?
I'm not sure there was a handbook. There was certainly all the forms, and I think there was printed guidance about how to fill in the forms. But I can't be sure. I think there was a manual of sorts that was on the wall.
A manual of sorts?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. And just on that, was there an appropriate risk profile tool which was used for those with enhanced CPA? status?
I think the same risk tools were used across the board. From what I remember, anybody that's admitted to a ward is automatically put on enhanced CPA, so it would have been the same risk tools.
And finally this, you've already made reference, although I take on board you couldn't be exact as to when the community mental health framework came in after the period of transition. Did you yourself receive any training in relation to that?
No.
Okay. Just in terms, now moving to the main part of your evidence, and so you know where we are going, I think the main part of your evidence that you give in your statement is around the Linden Centre, isn't it? And that's 6 years between 2003 and 2009.
Yes.
But we will then go on to look at some of the observations you can make through your community work.
Okay.
And I think there's a short period of time on the lakes. But the majority of your evidence, as I understand it, you'll correct me when we go through, is to do with Finchingfield Ward.
Yes, it is, yes.
Before we start on Finchingfield Ward, though, can we begin with your first role for NEPT, which is at the Christopher unit?
Yeah, yeah.
Now, you've already told us that you did your training at the Barking and Havering Brentwood Trust. What other training, if any, had you received before starting at NEPT?
Whatever mandatory training was available at the time. I remember at Worley Hospital we did control and restraint training. I did a 998 course, which is about teaching and assessing, mentoring students. I can't remember what specific training other than that, because I went there as soon as I qualified. And the last 6 months of my nursing training placement was at the ward that I ended up working on. So there was a crossover between learning from ward-based stuff and learning at college.
Right. And I should have said really at the outset, we take on board that a lot of what you're giving evidence about is over 20 years ago. Yeah. So if there are areas where you can't remember specifics, please do say.
Yes, will do.
You do explain, however, at paragraph 11 of your witness statement, how that when you were at the Christopher unit, you developed a nursing model, and that nursing model saw all staff directly involved in patients' care, as opposed to there being a system of designated nurses.
That's right.
Have I described it accurately?
Yeah, yeah.
And you explain that, and this is in your statement. It had been identified that certain patients did not always connect with all staff members, and as such a system was developed whereby nurses were rotated so everyone was involved in different aspects of every patient's care. For example, assessment, risk assessment and discharge plan.
That's right, yes.
And you also explained that that nursing model was nominated for a trust award.
It was, yes.
And by that do you mean a NEPT award?
Yes.
When you say you developed the model, can I just ask what you mean about that? Was that something that you brought in from your previous employment, or was it something that you yourself designed, or with others? How did it come about?
Yeah, it was when I was on the Christopher unit. It was at the time. I think it was only a 6 or 7 bedded unit, and there would have been maybe 8 or 9 qualified members of staff. And often we only had 3 or 4 patients, so you might have 3 or 4 members of staff fully responsible for a patient's all the paperwork, engaging with other agencies, while the other members of staff would basically just come into work, do the medication. So there's a big disparity between the responsibilities. Basically I designed this system whereby the named nurse system still, so each patient still had an allocated nurse, but allocated nurse would only be responsible for getting to know the patient and for basically spending time with the patient and learn as much as they could about them. Whereas the other members of staff, say there were 6 others, there would be 2 in, sorry, I'll start again. Say there were 9 members of staff, there'd be 3 in the assessment team, 3 in a risk assessment team and 3 in a discharge team. So each of those would be responsible for every patient's risk assessment. Whereas the named nurse would only be responsible for getting to know the patient and building up trust with that patient. So what would happen then is every member of staff would know something about every patient and have to engage with them on a positive therapeutic level as opposed to being just a stranger.
But that was on a ward with quite a small number
It
of
was,
patients.
yes,
Yes.
yeah, because there would always be a situation, well, there were situations where if a member of staff, the named nurse was on holiday or sick, that patient was then kind of left with no real contact point amongst the staff team, and the nursing model kind of overcame that, whereby every member of staff did have contact with everyone.
So your nursing model, meant that when somebody was away, they were just as familiar with another member of staff.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. And also, because there were 3 diaries that we brought in, an assessment diary, a risk assessment diary, and a discharge diary. So the members, say you're in the assessment team, you would come into work, look in that assessment diary and see this needed to be done. Or you look in a risk assessment diary. So that way, nothing was missed. It wasn't all down to one member of staff to kind of do everything.
And we'll come back to that in a moment, because that's something you then tried to put in place in Finchingfield on a larger scale. And as I said, you explain it in a moment. But just back to this model for a moment. You talk about developing it. Was it a practice you'd seen elsewhere? Was it a standard practice elsewhere? Did you base it on something you'd seen or heard?
No, it was just something I kind of thought about over a period of time, and wrote it up and then presented it to the manager of the unit, who said, we'll give it a go, and we did do that. And then there was an innovations award thing. There was lots of different kind of stuff like that, and the manager submitted it to that.
This probably answers my next question. You describe in your statement how care was very doctor-led at that, clinician-led at that period of time. Did you have to consult with other healthcare professionals, clinicians, doctors, before introducing that model?
No.
Or
No.
You've already explained how, because there were 3 diaries, nothing was missed, or you felt there was less possibility of things being missed. Are there any other ways in which you consider your model assisted with risk assessment and risk management?
I think it helps newly qualified staff in terms of during the course, because people would rotate within the teams every 4 months. So during the course of a year, a newly qualified member of staff would be kind of very up to speed in all areas. But yeah, in terms of risk management, it was just highlighted that because we had an actual team responsible for it, it was always at the top of what people would think about each day when they went into work. Particularly because it was an intensive care unit, people were there because of the level of risk that they posed. So on that unit, it was kind of very much the big thing.
And do you consider that the model supported patients then in achieving psychological safety?
Yeah, I do. As much as you can achieve that on these kind of places.
In terms of this model, was it monitored at all? We know you took it to senior managers. They said give it a go. It was nominated for a trust award for innovation or something of that nature. Was it monitored? Did anybody review it or look at the metrics or assess it?
I can't remember, I'm afraid.
So there was no audit of outcomes or any particular metric?
I think we just kind of were left to get on with it, and we felt that it worked, and that was it. I don't think there was certainly no outside kind of audit of it.
Under this model, did patients who self-harm have access to psychotherapeutic treatment or specific psychological interventions that were tailored to their need? Within this
not under the model. The model was mainly directed in terms of what staff would do.
So that was a separate consideration?
Yeah.
Were there any other particular changes that you introduced in relation to the provision of nursing care?
Nothing specific, I don't think.
Moving on then to the Linden Centre, to Finchingfield Ward. You were the ward manager. Your line manager was a gentleman called Stuart McGough.
Yes.
And he in turn had another line manager who we won't name today. When you started at Finchingfield in October 2003, what type of ward was it?
It was an acute admissions ward.
Mixed?
Yes.
How many beds when you started?
When we start, I think maybe 20. And I think in time that was reduced to 18 because there was a short corridor of single rooms that were then turned into meeting rooms, I think.
And it was next door to Gallywood ward?
Yes.
And what type of ward was Gallywood ward?
That was acute admissions mixed ward. We just covered different areas of geographical areas.
So they were the same type of ward?
Yes.
Same size?
I think so.
Roughly?
Yeah, I think so.
In your witness statement, in your first witness statement at paragraph 10, you say that once you started working there, you noticed that things were done differently to how you had been trained or how you were accustomed to doing things. You compare to Worley Hospital. Are you also comparing to the Christopher unit?
The Christopher unit and the acute admission wards are two very different approaches. So, yeah, that would be like comparing oranges and apples to a degree. But there's certainly a comparison with the acute mixed ward that I worked on at Worley Hospital to Finchingfield ward.
So the most meaningful comparison is
Yeah.
the one with Worley.
Yes.
What were the main differences then between Finchingfield and Worley?
Right, I mean, Worley Hospital was a much higher level of intensity. I'd never met more people who were more in distress or higher levels of aggression than I saw when I was at Worley Hospital. We took patients from Barking and Dagenham, so it was a different socio-economic area. Although it was a large hospital, it felt you were on a standalone unit, even though you were part of a big hospital. I mean, I couldn't even tell you who the clinical manager was when I worked there.
At Worley?
Yeah, you just worked on the ward. Because of the intensity there, you only had 4 staff to, say, 24 patients. The real emphasis was you have to get to know the patients. You have to get on with them because you are kind of quite vulnerable as a member of staff. And you have to really be positive in trying to make a difference each day. It was very much about engaging with people.
So how was Finchingfield different then?
Going back to the Christopher unit, when I was on the Christopher unit, I couldn't understand how those patients weren't on an acute ward because they were kind of the level of risk patients that I was used to dealing with on an acute ward at Worley. And when I came onto Finchingfield ward, my immediate impression was I can't understand how most of these patients can't be managed in the community. So it was a very different kind of level.
Did you find them less challenging than you had experienced
Yes,
elsewhere?
yes. Yeah. Overall, there were certainly patients that were very distressed and were challenging, but certainly not the majority and certainly not to the extent that I'd seen at Worley Hospital.
You say that you felt like an outsider, but that you stuck to what you felt was right.
Yeah.
What was it that you felt was right that you stuck to?
When I came into Finchingfield, one of the main things what I learned at Worley Hospital was how detrimental it is to people to stay on an acute admission ward for any length of time. If I can give an example, there was a young man who was very, very unwell, and he'd been very heavily medicated, and he was gradually getting better to the extent he could get some ground leave. And he'd been on the ward for about 6 or 7 months. So I took him on the ground leave and we went to the main road and he started crying. And he said to me he'd forgotten how fast cars could go, and it really affected me at the time. And I always remembered that. So when I went to Finchingfield ward, it seemed people were just left day after day to kind of wait for the doctor to decide what to do with it, and no real impetus.
You, at paragraph 12, you talk about how you tried to introduce your nursing model, although, as the chair has already pointed out, you'd introduced it on a much smaller unit, and this was a ward with potentially 20 beds. But was it still that 3-team approach?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
And you say that some of the staff weren't happy with that.
That's right.
Were they resistant to it?
Yes, they were, yeah.
To what extent?
They were resistant to the way I wanted them to kind of work. It felt to me when I was first there was a lot of apathy. Patients were a nuisance. The staff would be in the office, there'd be a knock on the door, and people would go, like, roll their eyes. And I just couldn't believe it, to be honest, because where I'd been, I was always at Whalley. I remember I was told once that the more you learn about the life the patients led and their experience of life, the less likely you will be in the future to be talking about their death. And again, that was a charge nurse that said that to me, and that really stuck with me. So when I went to Finchleyfield Ward, it just felt the level of apathy I was astonished at, to be honest.
And you say that, in fact, it led to a high turnover.
It did.
Which allowed you then to interview people and get the staff you wanted on the ward. Sorry, I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
And you said you were looking for genuinely kind and open-minded people.
That's right.
And is that because those that were there when you arrived were not, you thought, genuinely kind and open-minded people?
I couldn't say in terms of whether they were kind and open-minded people, but certainly on the ward, in the roles that they were in, I didn't feel they had the necessary kind of positivity to do the job I wanted them to do. I think I need to differentiate between what they were like as people and what they were like.
Understood. It's how you wanted them to be on the ward that was important.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, almost everywhere I've met throughout my career were nice people, but they didn't mean that they were always effective.
It was my clumsy way of asking it, Mr. It's my fault, but I think you've made it clear. In terms of the model which you introduced, the 3 teams model with the diary to make sure things weren't missed, and we'll come on to, for example, weekly reviews in a minute. You say that in your view the model worked, and you base that on the fact that in the time you were there, 2003 to 2006, you say there was just one instance of somebody taking their own life.
Yes.
When you make that comparison, are you making that comparison to other wards you worked on or other wards you knew about? Or?
Yeah. Yes, there was certainly more incidents on Gallywood Ward, who obviously didn't use the nursing model. But I wouldn't put it entirely down to the nursing model. It was the approach of the staff and the personalities of the staff that did make a big difference as well.
And that's on your ward, you're saying?
Yeah.
What about incidents of self-harm? Were they reduced in that period, do you think?
Again, not to do with the model, I don't think, necessarily. More the approach we took, if somebody did self-harm, it was always about trying to learn and understand why they did, to see it as an act, a behavioural act, which was the case before, where people would almost be punished for self-harming, where if they've been self-harming to regulate their emotions for 20 years and they do that on the wall to try and kind of cope, and they're getting everything taken out of their room and put on observations, I didn't agree with that.
And I'm going to ask you about your approach to that in just a moment, because you're very specific about that in your statement, and about what you would describe, I think, as a more positive approach to dealing with instances of self-harm. I promise I'll come back. No, I promise I'll come back to that in a moment. Can I just then ask you about admission to Finchleyfield? Just picking up on one or two things you say in your statement. When the patient was first admitted, a 72-hour care plan was put into place. It would cover observations, physical health, medications, legal status, and so on. Was there... How were they put together? Was there a form to fill in with set criteria?
It was just a standard care plan that you would print out, and then you would add in the different personal details.
Were family and patients involved at that time? Family or patients involved at that time?
In the compiling of the care? No, they were just literally printed out from the computer. They were just standard forms.
But you didn't involve the...
No.
Would you call it a tick box exercise?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then a more personalised care plan would be developed after...
Within the 72
hours. You've talked about, in paragraph 15, how those more personalised care plans should have been reviewed weekly. I think that's where you say your nursing model meant it was less likely that they would be missed.
Yes, because the named nurse would be responsible for compiling the care plan with the patient and reviewing it, but not having to do the risk assessment for that patient and the discharge plan, is they could focus very much on that patient's care. It did mean that they would be doing risk assessments for other patients if they were in the risk assessment team, but that would be separate.
Because I think you say that they were weekly reviews would be missed depending on who the designated nurse was.
Yeah.
Can you give us a sense of how often weekly reviews were missed?
No, sorry, I can't. Just if somebody was on holiday or if they were off sick, they wouldn't necessarily be picked up because there was no diary system for them to kind of use.
And in terms of the weekly reviews, when they were completed, did they involve patients and their families?
Certainly involved patients. I can't say to what extent they involved families. All I can say was if it did involve families, it wasn't sufficient.
I think that's something that you, a reflection that you've developed since your community work as well in terms of, and I'll come back to that in a moment. In terms of observations, at paragraph 16 of your witness statement, you confirm that when a patient was admitted to the Linden Centre, observation levels would automatically be set at level 2, which is 4 times an hour. Is that right? Was that the Linden Centre overall or just Finchingfield Ward?
It was certainly the Linden Centre overall. I think it may have been a trust-wide thing. But it did cause difficulties because patients, certainly people who were newly admitted for the first time, wouldn't always have been told that when they agreed to come in to be admitted. So they would come in to be admitted and then we'd have to say to them, you can't leave for 72 hours because you're on level 2 observations. So that would always cause some conflict.
So it was the fact that they were being
monitored,
observed 4 times an hour.
Yeah.
What if their presentation called for a higher level?
Then it would be discussed during the shift, and then during the course of that shift it would be elevated to a higher level of observation and then discussed with the doctor.
So how long after their arrival on the ward could that happen if need be?
It could be immediate if necessary, yeah.
And how quickly could they be decreased?
I'm pretty sure that at the time when I first went to Finchingfield Ward, the nurse in charge and the staff could reduce the levels of observations, but over time that became the task of only the doctor could perform. But yeah, to answer your question, it could be just a discussion and then decreased, even just for a certain period of time to see how things went, etc.
You deal in your statement with how when you first started, in fact, it was the nurse in charge of each shift that was able to decrease and increase, but it later changed to being led by doctors in about 2005, 2006.
Yeah, roughly, yeah.
Do you know what prompted that change?
I can only imagine, I don't know specifically, but I can only imagine the level of observation was reduced somewhere and then something bad happened and it was felt that it had to be a doctor's decision.
So you assume it was reactive to something that had taken place.
Yeah.
And you describe it as problematic because you considered that the nursing staff were in a better position.
Yeah.
Was that your preference then for nurses to take responsibility to changes of observation?
It was, yes. Yeah.
And why was that?
Because I felt certainly, I could only speak for the ward that I was on, that I think we developed a very good relationship with the patients. Well, most of the patients, most of the time, I would say. So there was a degree of honesty back and forth. So if a patient felt at risk, they could say, you know what, my observations increased. Equally, if we felt that the patient didn't need to have that level of observations on them, we could confidently decrease it, knowing what the risks were.
Did you feel, though, that comfortable? Did all nurses feel comfortable with that?
No, they didn't. No, I think over time they did, but you feel more comfortable with those decisions if you know the patient better. And the more you know the patient, the more honest they will be with you generally.
What part do you think then that the doctor should be playing in those decisions?
The doctor would generally see the patients once a week, maybe for 10 or 15 minutes. If the doctor was around, we may have consulted the doctor. I very much felt it was the staff that were more aware of what the risks were.
Did you raise your concerns or share this point of view with anybody?
I don't recall.
You also say in your witness statement that sometimes you felt increasing observation levels was done with the idea of protecting the trust rather than thinking about what was best for the patient.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
I didn't see what any good it did to have somebody on level 3 observations for an extended period of time. Level 3 observations basically means somebody is within eyesight, so we're basically being followed around the ward by a different member of staff every hour. To my mind, if someone needs that level of observation, it's the engagement needs to be intensified with the person as opposed to just being watched. And if somebody's on level 3 observations, that member of staff then becomes fully accountable for if something goes wrong, which I didn't think was right.
In fact, you say in your statement, we'll come on to it in a moment, that when you're dealing with something like level 3 observations, to use the word observation is misleading, and it should be engagement.
Yeah, it should
described.
Be. Absolutely. Yeah.
Because of the one-to-one nature of
Yeah.
it, and that it's important that the member of staff engages rather than just studies, if you like, the patient. In terms of, I'm just in terms of time frame, are we still talking about Finch and Philpott
Yes.
here?
Yeah.
And if, as you say, higher observation levels were put in place when they weren't really indicated, did you find this affected the ability of staff or staffing numbers to provide supervision for other patients, for other things?
Yeah, I think at the time, the thing was where if you had one person on level 3 observation, that was to be subsumed in, managed by the current staff numbers. So if you had 5 on a shift, you could have one person on level 3 observations. If you had more than one person on level 3 observations, that would necessitate an extra member of staff. And if you couldn't get that extra member of staff there, it would take away from
other activities, other therapeutic engagement for the
Absolutely.
other patients on the ward.
The same as if you had lots of patients on level 2 observations. If you had, say, 10 people on level 2 observations, then that's 2 members of staff that are tasked during that hour with doing observations. So yeah, it would.
Why do you think the Trust, or NEPT as it was then, thought it needed the protection? You said you thought it would have been done for the protection of the Trust.
I can't speak for the Trust, I'm afraid.
Okay, maybe I could ask it this way. Why, in your view, do you think it was being done for protecting the Trust?
I think it was a way of having individuals accountable for something that went wrong. So if somebody was on level 2 observations, that member of staff conducting those observations would be accountable for what went wrong if something did.
Can I just ask you the flip side?
Yeah.
Do you have any experience, or did you ever perceive any pressure to reduce observation levels because of staffing numbers or staff workload?
No. On Finchfield, we had very few patients on level 3 observations while I was there. If somebody's risks increase, we just try to engage with them more, because I was always of the view that level 3 observations could only be a detriment to the patient. And if you're paranoid, or if you're depressed, or if you've got an urge to self-harm, and the response to that is to have some stranger following you around or just looking at you, that's never going to help.
My next question was going to be, do you consider this policy change, the doctor-led observations and this often increase in observation levels had an impact on patient care and safety?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. If somebody was on level 3 observations, you would, in my experience, you'd see an increase in risk because of how the person would feel being so restricted.
Was there a collaborative approach, at least, between the doctors and the nursing staff in terms of observations?
Over time, yes. I think when I first came to Finch and Field, I think the doctors, the consultants on the ward were maybe as, I don't know what the right word is, sceptical or aghast at the way I felt things needed to be, because I wasn't shy in kind of saying to doctors.
You weren't shy, did you say?
In saying to doctors how I thought things should be. It didn't make me popular, but I was just advocating for the patients. I was always taught where I worked before that you do whatever you can for the patients, and that's what I did.
You've already explained how you think that it's not really about observations, it's about engagement. In your view, then, was the impact of the observations, I'd probably ask this in another way, if staff engaged well with the patients when they were observing them, say in level 3, did you notice any positive impact?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. If someone was ever put on level 3, our absolute priority was to get that level reduced by reducing the risks that led to that person being put on level 3 in the first place. And you only reduce the risk by engaging.
In your second witness statement, you say a little bit more about this. This is paragraph 52 for those who may be following the witness statement. You say that sometimes, and you reference many times when a patient was informed of a decision to increase observation levels after the fact, which was not appropriate, and you say not at all conducive to the strength of the therapeutic relationship. What do you mean by that?
The patient we'll be seeing in the ward review may be wanting to get some leave or go out, or get off the ward or something like that. They would then leave the room, and then the doctor would say, no, that person needs to be put on level 2 observations, or no, tell that person they're not going to go on leave. So the nursing staff would then be left to give the bad news to the patient, who in the moment wouldn't necessarily understand that we were just passing on a message, even if it was one we didn't agree with.
So this is your experience of observations being reduced again, being changed, increased or reduced against patients' wishes?
Yeah. I've got to say it didn't happen often on Finchinfield ward. Over time, my working relationship with the consultants did improve markedly, I would say. Hopefully they would say the same, but who knows?
In terms of observations being reduced, against patients' wishes, was that a common occurrence as well?
No, I don't think so. No, because most patients didn't want to be on the ward. So,
Didn't want to be on the ward and didn't want to be
and if they were on a
observed.
certain level of observations, their chances of them being discharged in the next few days would be less.
So a reduction in observation was generally popular?
Yes.
Or well received?
Yeah, because it would be a part of the discharge pathway.
In terms of clinical assessments on the ward, you give information about this in paragraph 1 of your second witness statement, and I won't take you to that, but you talk about informal assessments. You talk about there being a type of informal assessment. Is that really reflecting the kind of daily interaction between staff and patients?
Yeah, I've probably poorly phrased that. It's nothing as grand as an assessment. It's just getting to know the person.
Were they documented at all?
Each shift, member of staff who was allocated that person on the shift would document the engagement that they had with that patient. Yeah.
And if it was considered necessary, was it possible for nursing staff to request a medical, if they considered a more formal assessment, they could request a more formal review? Yeah,
there'd always be a doctor around that you could call in. Yeah.
And what kind of things would trigger escalation to a formal review?
It would generally be maybe someone's deterioration in their physical health, or if side effects from a medication, for example, or if a patient wanted to go on leave, we would call the doctor and the doctor would come and decide on that.
Would suicidal ideation or expressing wish to die or self-harm trigger such an escalation?
Not necessarily. It would depend, because we could raise the level of observations if we needed to. If it was felt that some extra medication was needed, then we would call the doctor. But we would manage a high level of risk on the ward amongst the nursing staff.
In terms of managing risk and assessing the risk, what risk stratification system did you use on the ward in Finchinfield ward?
I can't remember the names of them, to be honest.
Was it the Mobius?
No, it's something called HONUS, I think, may have been. Again, it was an acronym, I can't tell you what it meant, but it was part of the CPA package.
You deal in your first witness statement, sorry I'm jumping about, but it's just trying to draw them together, with physical health assessments, which you've just referred to. And in terms of physical health assessment, you describe the approach to physical and mental health needs being disjointed.
Yeah.
And can I just confirm that when you make that observation, are you talking again about Finchinfield ward and the
Yes, I am, yeah. I think, again, that goes back to when I worked at Worley Hospital. It was miles away from any A&E department. So we had suction machines, we did stitches, we had drips, lots of physical stuff that we would do as staff. Whereas at the Linda Centre, because it was next door to Broomfield Hospital, I felt there was really no kind of skills amongst the staff in terms of basic physical things.
So we said no kind of skills to deal with basic physical?
No, I don't think so, no.
You say also that you were particularly thinking of those diagnosed with forms of personality disorder or ADHD who were described antipsychotic medication.
Yeah.
Come back to that in a moment. And at your paragraph 38, you say the general knowledge of staff at the Linden Centre in relation to comorbid issues was poor.
Yeah.
There weren't any specialists in dementia or learning disabilities, for example, and we often relied on doctors who were training in psychiatry but might have already done their 3 years of general training in general medicine. Or, in fact, you go on to say, for diabetes, you might rely on a staff member who was themselves diabetic.
Absolutely, and I have to include myself in that. My knowledge was no better than anybody else's, to be honest.
Do you remember, were there ever occasions when you required, for example, specialist information in relation to diabetes or learning disabilities and you couldn't access it?
No, I don't recall that, no. And again, I think that goes back to our failings with dealing with families and involving families, because families would have known how to manage somebody's diabetes and stuff like that. That's certainly a failing of ours.
So you think if you'd got more family engagement and information, you'd been in a better position to care for those other issues as well as mental health?
And certainly with autism as well, because the general knowledge there was just so poor. And again, I include myself in that.
You've compared it already to Worley Hospital, where you said there was good facilities and good knowledge.
Yeah.
Other than Worley, have you seen differences in other wards upon which you've worked?
No.
Or is that a prevailing issue?
Yes, prevailing issue, I believe, yeah.
In relation to those with issues around drugs and alcohol, you say at your paragraph 37 that despite the fact that a significant proportion of patients at the Linden Centre were admitted with pre-existing drug and alcohol issues, there were no permanent drug and alcohol workers attached to the wards or the day hospital, and I thought that the approach to treating those with drug and alcohol dependency was, and I'm using your word here, terrible.
Yeah.
What was so terrible about that?
People were just referred to as an alcoholic or a druggie or whatever. It was no thought was put into how that person came, why that person takes that amount of alcohol, why that person takes that amount of drugs, and the trauma that may have led to that. And the same with people with personality disorder. I felt they were just maligned, spoken of in a very bad way.
Did you say maligned?
Yeah, yeah.
Just going back to the drug and alcohol for a moment, I'll come back to the other disorders. What provision was available for patients with drug and alcohol dependency issues?
I believe there was nothing within the trust, as far as I'm aware at the time. There was an organisation, I think, called Changes or Open Road at the time, where patients could access outside of hospital, but not while they were on the ward.
And what about therapeutic options on the ward?
There was none.
And what steps then do you consider should have been taken?
I feel there should have been certainly more training for people in terms of dual diagnosis, in terms of the effect of alcohol and drugs on people's mental health. Again, going back to why do people want to blot everything out? What else is going on? But it was just saying, right, they've had a drink, they need to be discharged, or they just take drugs. It was terrible. Yeah.
In fact, and we may as well reference it now, you conclude your second witness statement in terms of recommendations that you consider there should be a dual diagnosis team in all areas of EPUT.
Yeah.
So that the priority that is given to the prevalence of poor outcomes with those involving alcohol and illicit substance use.
Yeah.
Just moving on to neurodivergent patients, which we've already touched upon. Again, there's reference to the care being disjointed. What training, we're talking about Finching Fields here, aren't we? What training did you have in the care of neurodivergent patients at that time?
None at all.
None at all?
No.
And to what extent, in your experience, were Gallywood and Finching Fields suitable for neurodivergent patients?
I don't think they were. It was, like I say, I include myself in this. I had no real knowledge at all. I think in time there was an online training module in terms of autism, but I think that was much further down the line.
that the inquiry's heard evidence, I think, about training that was introduced
Okay.
by the trust. We're saying online. We're talking about the Oliver McGowan training.
Yeah.
Was there a system in place for considering the appropriateness of the ward environment for neurodivergent patients at all?
Not as far as I was aware.
In your experience then, was neurodivergence ever miscategorised as personality disorder or even just troublesome or challenging behaviour, do you think?
It must have been, yeah. But like I say, my knowledge was as poor as everybody else's in that it was only through the Ben Morris kind of case that I became kind of aware of it, to be honest.
You have already expressed your concern about those with autism or ADHD or some forms of personality disorder being prescribed antipsychotic medication. Do you consider that there was an over-reliance on pharmacological approaches to
Yes.
those types of patients?
Yes. Yeah.
Do you think that the lack of specialism and knowledge that you've described led to those patients being put on the wrong care and treatment pathways?
Yes.
Do you think it led to them potentially receiving substandard or inadequate care?
Yes.
Can you think of any specific examples where patients were failed because of the lack of specialisms?
The main example would be Ben Morris.
Would be Ben. It may be that there weren't any particular approaches, but were some of the approaches used possibly counterproductive then?
I should imagine if someone's prescribed medication that's unnecessary, 'cause all medication carries with it side effects, etc. And so, yeah, if someone's prescribed the wrong medication, it would have a detrimental effect.
Was the lack of specialism in comorbidities, including learning disabilities or neurodivergence, something that you ever raised with managers at that time?
No, I don't think I did. Certainly towards the end of my time on Finchley Field, we had 3 people admitted in a short period of time who were suffering with early onset dementia. We had absolutely no skills in managing that, and for all sorts of reasons that was the wrong decision to place those people there. Incredibly distressing for them, for the other patients and for the families and for the staff, and I raised that continuously in my last few months at the Linden Centre.
We didn't refer specifically to dementia in your evidence, but in your statement, I think you say the same about lack of access to specialism, to specialist services for dementia as well. Can I ask you a little bit about then the ward environment, which also touches upon, I think, your approach to self-harm. You say at paragraph 25 of your witness statement that when you first started on Finchingfield Ward, it seemed largely medically led, but over the time the relationship became more collaborative. Medication is important, but there is much more to it than staff can help with because they spend so much time with the patients during the week. Mm-hmm. You also reference that your general approach, which we'll come on to, and that your nursing model worked because you frequently had empty beds.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, I think because on the care-based system, you could look at the average lengths of stay of the different wards, the readmission rates, etc. And Finchley was regularly, we had the shortest length of stay, the fewest readmission rates, which would indicate to me that the discharges had been appropriate. And we regularly had empty beds, so we had patients from various other areas of the trust come into them.
I was going to ask you about that you ended up caring for others because you had the space.
Yeah.
Can I ask you then about your general approach as you describe it on Finchingfield Ward, and particularly your approach to self-harm, which you've already touched on. You describe your approach to self-harm as what you just call more humane and effective. That's the words you use.
Yeah.
And you say that, and this is your paragraph 26, our first question was, do you feel better or did it help, rather than immediately to medicate or increase observation level or remove all items from their room.
That's right.
And you say, I don't think, however, that senior management were fully in agreement, and I don't believe our approach was replicated on other wards.
That's right, yeah.
And again, you've already touched on this, but do we take from that that the preference of what was then NEPT senior management was to increase observation levels or to remove items?
Yes.
And you disagreed with that approach?
Yes, I did, yeah.
And why did you disagree with that approach?
My views of self-harm are very much as an expression of emotion. It's not a behaviour, it's not a suicide attempt. It's the way someone has expressed themselves. And often the person would say they would feel better as a result. Obviously, there's danger involved in there if someone's cutting themselves, etc. But to punish someone who's expressing their emotions in the only way they've learned how or could think of in the moment, I didn't agree with. Because people's rooms in these sort of places is their haven of where they can actually feel like a human being and not a patient for a while. If you then strip all that out, then that can only be bad for that person's mental health.
So you considered that to be a punitive reaction, did you?
Absolutely, because the time should be spent speaking with that person about how they could maybe manage that differently next time, or look at what's happening in the moment for them to have felt they needed to be express their emotions like that.
So again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you would advocate therapeutic engagement rather than reaction of either punitive or reducing risk by removing items?
Because I think it was similar to people I've met over the years who have alcohol problems. By keeping a bottle of wine in the house, for example, they can then resist that. Whereas if you take everything out of somebody's room, they will find a way of harming themselves one way or the other if they need to. So I felt the benefits of actually engaging with the person and keeping their immediate environment as they would want it was always best. Obviously, if somebody had a razor on them or something sharp or something they could evidently harm themselves with, then we would remove that.
So let me just coordinate. You'd take away the razor or something of that would give rise to a risk. But are you talking about personal possessions being taken away as a punishment?
Yeah, I know that certainly happened on Gallywood Ward, and I don't know where else. And when I went to Ardley Ward, that was the process then, that basically everything was taken out of the room and the person was just literally left with their bed and their bedding.
Do you think that was being done out of an abundance of caution or as a punishment? I mean, as an indicator that if you do this, this is the consequence.
I think it was certainly an abundance of caution, but I think the patient would often feel they were being punished because of it.
And then, just to test your approach, do you think there were occasions on which a patient continued to self-harm because you had not taken away?
No, I don't remember any. I think the approach that we took was very refreshing for the patient as well. They would be relieved. The fact that we were saying it's not a bad thing you've done, this is how you've expressed yourself, what's happening, rather than just a blanket approach of this is, because that's what they were used to.
Can I just pick up on the Chair's question there?
Yeah, of course.
Which is, you've talked about removal of razors, but can I just be clear, does that mean that with your approach, there would have been occasions, or there may have been occasions, where you left someone who had self-harmed with access to an item with which they'd self-harmed or something else they could self-harm with?
No, absolutely.
You would remove the risk item?
Yeah, absolutely.
In that sense, in the sense of the approaches described, would you agree that you personally took something of a permissive approach to self-harm?
No.
Would you describe it as more of a positive approach rather than a permissive
I would agree.
approach?
I was, again, going back to being a humane approach, I think it's an understanding of what the person's going through, and a collaborative approach is how we can manage these instances if you feel like that in the future.
Was that collaborative, positive approach, however you want to describe it, was that supported by NEPT's policies or procedures, or was this... Were you out there, so to speak, with this approach? Were you outlier? No,
I don't think so, because I mean the approach was about kindness and compassion and engaging with the patient. If there was ever a policy against that, I haven't seen it.
Just in terms of practical steps, would giving a razor to an individual expressing a desire to self-harm been in line with that positive approach?
No, if people had razors and things along like that, they would have been brought in from leave and person not searched properly, etc. No, we didn't give out people razors.
Do you recall any incidents whereby you or any other member of staff on Finchingfield ward permitted a patient to have access to a razor when they wanted
I
to
don't
supplement?
recall. I mean, what I suppose I start is what I don't want to give the impression of is that it was a fantastic place. We tried to do things in a certain way, but there were still things that went wrong, still patients harmed themselves, and there were still incidents. We certainly didn't get it right all the time, but I think most of us tried to.
Taking on board that you, as you say, you didn't get it right all the time, and in your statement I think you make quite clear that there were lots of times when things weren't right. But do I understand your answer to have been that you don't recall any instance by where during which a patient was allowed access to a razor and they felt like...
But that certainly doesn't mean it didn't happen.
You say it didn't mean it didn't happen?
No.
Okay. In terms of the environment more generally, and I'll keep an eye on the time, if we maybe move a little bit, and then I know that we have to break at a certain time. I think we'll transcribe that, but we've got a few more moments. In relation to the ward environment of Finchingfield more generally, you explain how it was initially quite difficult to manage. There were dormitories, sometimes with 6 people in. It was difficult as a physical environment to manage, I think you say. But ultimately you moved to shared rooms and then single rooms, but that thought was given as to who to put together in any shared room. You've already said in your evidence, and it's in your witness statement at paragraph 44, that you always advocated trying to see things from the patient's perspective. Do you feel you were alone in that approach? Or?
No, certainly there was a core team of staff that we developed over time that were excellent with that approach. I would say the majority of them were support workers. We had some fantastic support workers. I always made sure I didn't differentiate between the different grades, because it's just people trying to help people at the end of the day.
You also reference the transition from mixed wards to the single-sex wards that you've described.
Yeah, I'm not sure when that happened, because I know when I went to Ardley ward it was certainly single-sex wards. Not sure about the Linden Centre.
Did it happen while you were there?
I can't remember, to be honest.
All right.
Yeah, I don't think it did, but I'm not sure.
But what you do say is that you recognise the issues with mixed wards, particularly on women, on women who may have been abused, and when men may be intimidating, and how that you deal with that at paragraph 45. You also say that while you were there, the Linden Centre became what you describe as increasingly restrictive and evolved into something more like a secure unit, you felt.
Yeah.
In what way do you feel it became more locked up?
It was physically extra doors put in place. So you'd have the door, it used to be just a door to Finchingfield, and then you'd have the reception and then out, and then there became a door in between Finchingfield and reception, and then another entrance after reception. So, yeah.
Do you remember when those changes took place?
I think it was towards the end of my time there.
But while you were there?
Yeah, I believe, certainly one of them did. But then I think when I visited the Linden Centre from the community, it seemed there was extra. Yeah.
So when you went back?
Yeah.
And what were staff told about those changes and why they were happening?
They just happened, no, right.
And did they have an impact on inpatients that you saw? It becoming more locked up?
I couldn't say, because people were locked up anyway. Even though it's an acute admission ward, you still had to have permission for staff member to let you through a door and then through another door. So I think maybe the extra 2 doors wouldn't have made much difference, really. It's just it felt as a member of staff that you were walking into a more secure.
I understand. Did there remain a practical distinction between the voluntary and the involuntary patients on the ward?
Not in terms of the security.
Did you raise concerns about the increased restrictions and the fact that the unit felt more locked up?
Only amongst ourselves. I don't believe I raised them, because the work was just done and then that was it. We weren't consulted at all about anything like that.
You also say in your statement, this is at your paragraph 50, that as the ward environment became more restrictive, it made people more likely to want to leave when they had the chance. Yeah. Did you notice a change in the number of absconsions when the ward became more restricted?
I couldn't say from memory, I'm afraid.
When a patient absconded, what was the process after you made contact with them? So if someone absconded and then once you'd got hold of them, what was the process?
It would depend a lot on if they were, because some people would have leave for an hour, for example, and then after 2 hours they weren't back, and then we would make contact with them. We would generally just ask them what was happening and could they come back to the ward, and if they wanted to have formal leave, overnight leave, that needed to be discussed with the doctor.
Did you ever authorise absconsion as leave retrospectively?
No.
I'm just going to ask you about one more separate topic, and then I think that will bring us to about an hour and a half, which is when we have a break. I was just assessing the questions. When you made your statement, you were asked about ligature risks on the ward, just dealing with ward environment. And you say that the day after Benjamin Morris died, to which you've already referred, which was Christmas time 2008, you went to Gallywood Ward, which is where he had died. And you discovered the type of wardrobe door handle that had been used. And you went back to Finchingfield Ward in order to take them off in Finchingfield Ward. And you were told by your clinical manager, then your line manager, which was Stuart McGough, that you were damaging, or you would be damaging, trust property, and it was a job for estates. Did you, in fact, did you get to physically take any of those handles off in Finchingfield?
Yeah, I had an electric screwdriver in the car and I physically took them off.
You had an electric screwdriver and you took them off?
Yeah, I took them off,
And were you made then to put them back on again?
Yeah, I refused to put them back on.
You refused to put them back on? Did somebody else, as far as you're aware?
estates put them on,
Were they eventually removed?
I believe so. Yeah, I can't remember, to be honest. Because it wasn't long after that I had left the Linden Centre.
And to the best of your recollection, it was Stuart McGough that...
I think so. Yeah, I can't be for sure, but it was certainly someone of a higher level.
So it might not have been Stuart McGough, but another manager?
Yeah.
Someone higher level to you?
Yeah.
Is that the only time when you were on Finchingfield Ward that a ligature risk was identified?
I don't know. There would be sort of regular, I think, yearly inspections. Where
I was about to ask you about
those. Come around.
What did those yearly inspections take place, as far as you remember?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. I mean, I was always aware of, again, from where I'd found somebody hanging at Morley Hospital after I'd been qualified a year, there was always... That whole situation stayed with me and still does. So I was always intent on... I would always be wandering around the ward, just kind of making sure things were okay. And one of the things that I was regularly doing was, if we had a toilet that was out of order, which wasn't an infrequent thing because there's lots of people using it, the process was always, the sign would be put on it and the door would be locked. And I was always insisting that that door remain open, because if somebody wanted to harm themselves, nobody would look inside a toilet that was out of order. So it's...
Did you consider then that so you've already described how you wandered around the ward. So we had the yearly inspections that you say you think were taking place. But you considered that in addition to those inspections, you needed to be hyper vigilant on them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And were you that vigilant when you worked on other wards, or was it just Finchingfield you felt you needed to be particularly vigilant about?
Yeah, certainly on Ardley Ward as well. Like I said, that situation that when I first, sort of a year after being qualified, that stayed with me, and like I say, still does. So that vigilance never changed wherever I worked.
More generally, whose responsibility was it then to assess the environmental risks on the ward?
As a ward manager, I would say it was my responsibility to make sure the ward was safe.
The time you were told, which you refused, you made clear, to put the handles back on, did you escalate your concerns about that to anybody?
Yeah, I certainly said to Stuart McGough, yeah.
you say you said to Stuart McGough?
Yeah.
Or whoever the manager was?
No, I certainly said to Stuart McGough about
Oh,
about the situation with
see.
the door handles. He was well aware of it. Yeah.
okay. So there was there a procedure beyond Stuart McGough that you could
I don't know.
escalate to?
Yeah. No.
At paragraph 49 of your statement, you say that the process for reacting to environmental risks was appalling
Yeah.
and not conducive to helping anyone. How do you think things should have been done differently then?
It seemed that any change was a result of a tragedy, as opposed to looking at proactively how things could be different. And I felt there was a massive disconnect between what we did on the ward and what was discussed and the experience of patients and staff on the ward compared to what was discussed at the team manager meetings or the area meetings that I went to. It felt like they were two different kind of establishments.
Do we take from that that you would say that no one had a sense of what was happening then on the ground?
Yeah, absolutely.
Chair, we've been going for, in fact, I think about an hour and 25 minutes. Would that be a convenient moment for a short break?
Yes.
I think it's about 10 minutes or 50. 40s. Could we return at 11:40, please, Chair?
11:40. Ms. Harris.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, before we continue, I think you would like me to remind those in the room not to speak while the witness is giving their answers so that the witness can be heard clearly in particular. And also, Mr. Ayres, you and I think, I'm sure it's my fault, have been talking over each other. So
Sorry.
That's a request from the transcriber that we don't, so I'll be careful not to do that in addition.
I think it was me as well, to be fair.
I'm sure it was me. Before I move on to ask about medication, which was our next topic, can I just go back to ask you a couple more questions about what you've described as your positive approach to self-harm on Finchingfield Ward? And it's around the question of razor blades.
Yeah.
Firstly, this. We talked about access to razors, times when razors were taken away. Would there have been times when a request may have been made by a patient for a razor and they would have been allowed that razor unsupervised?
I'm sure it would have happened. It shouldn't have happened, but that doesn't mean it didn't
I
happen.
mean, perhaps for washing, for bathroom reasons or something like that.
I don't recall, to be honest. I mean, if there was somebody who was absolutely no risk of self-harm and it wasn't in their makeup at all and there was no risk there, it may have happened. Yeah, I can't recall specifically.
So you can't recall, but it may have happened. And
Yeah.
so maybe you won't be able to answer this question, which is, if there were concerns around self-harm in respect of that patient,
Yeah.
would that patient have
They
been
certainly
allowed?
should not have been, no.
You say they should not have been?
No, definitely not.
You also talked about taking razors away, but this is my fault. I didn't ask you specifically about other potential items of risk in a room.
Other items, yeah.
So, because you've already told us on Gallywood Ward, they take everything out, and you
Yeah.
felt that was quite punitive.
Yeah.
On Finchingfield Ward, would you take out other items, for
Yes.
example, potential items that could be a potential ligature or something of
Yeah,
that nature?
absolutely. And think if there was a family photograph in a picture frame, had a glass frame, we'd take the photograph out, leave the photograph, but take the frame, stuff like that.
So you would remove other items of risk?
Yeah.
But what about items you can't remove? So, for example, headbanging is a particular form
Yeah, it
of
is, yeah.
self-harm. How would you manage that in those circumstances?
That may have been one of the occasions where people were put on level 3 observations for a period of time to manage that level of distress. And again, to talk to the person to bring down that level of stress and engage with them.
All right.
And medication as well, maybe, in those occasions.
All right. Thank you very much. That's
Okay.
good. let's pick up then with medication,
Sure.
because that was what I was going to ask you next anyway. You've already alluded to it, and at paragraph 29 of your first witness statement, you say that you describe a culture of overly medicating patients, in your view. And you say at paragraph 30, in your view, the use of night sedation was excessive and led to patients becoming dependent on it.
Yes.
And again, just let's be clear, we're talking about your time on Finching Field
Yes.
here. It would appear from your statement. Did you yourself witness patients being over-sedated?
Yes.
Did this include elderly patients?
In terms of the older adults that were on the ward,
Yes.
yes, yeah.
Sorry, maybe the word elderly was
Yeah, sorry.
older adults.
Yeah, sorry.
Would it have included patients that had other medical conditions, renally impaired patients, for example?
I would assume the doctors would have taken that into account when they prescribed, but I can't be sure.
Oh, all right. Are you aware of any instances where this over-medication or this culture of over-medication led to patients being harmed?
I think anyone's harmed if they take medication they don't need to the levels that they need it. My big issue was that behaviours were medicated as opposed to looking at why somebody behaved in a certain way. I've always believed that if the people are allowed to be angry, it's part of the human condition, and certainly on an acute admission ward, if you don't want to be there, you're going to be angry. That doesn't mean you should be medicated. The same if people are very distressed and tearful, that doesn't mean they need to be medicated.
Before I ask you a little bit about that, just back to the night sedation,
Yeah.
you also refer to the irony, that's my word, of the caffeinated drinks
Yeah.
being given,
Yeah.
and how you sort of moved to decaffeinated drinks.
Yeah.
Who did you approach, or who did you take that up with? What you know, because you were overruled, I think, on that,
Yeah,
weren't you?
yeah.
Who overruled you? What level of trust management structure was that decision made at?
Initially, the complaints came from Gallywood Ward because patients were going on to Gallywood Ward to get coffee because I'd brought in, and I'd explained it to all the patients at a meeting that we're going to be having decaffeinated drinks, and the patients weren't happy. But my view was that why are we allowing people free access to caffeine and then giving them increasing amounts of night sedation because they can't sleep?
You also say at paragraph 31 of your witness statement that you considered there came a time when doctors would ask patients, these are your words, what they'd want to be on,
Yeah.
and you considered that this abdicated professional responsibility, and you think
Yes.
it was to avoid complaints. Can I just ask you a couple of questions about that? Firstly, did you raise that concern with anybody?
Yes, I did. This was on Ardley Ward.
This was, so this is, right, so this
Yeah.
is the Lakes, is
Yes,
it?
the Lakes, yes.
I'll continue asking you about it, though, even though
Okay.
it's sitting in the middle of our Finching Field evidence. Who did you raise it with?
The manager, the ward manager. And with the doctors.
Why do you think, you say you thought it was to avoid complaints?
Yeah.
Why do you think they were doing it? What was your view?
When I went to Ardley Ward, the overriding thing seemed to be don't upset the patients. So you'd had patients on lots of diazepam, because I think I need to explain that sometimes if somebody's on an acute admission ward, a lot of people want medication. They want to be sort of out of, not feel what's going on because there's such a terrible places to be. So quite often patients would ask for extra medication and the doctors would just give it, which I didn't agree with.
But some patients also know themselves quite well.
Yes,
they know
absolutely.
what they respond to,
Yeah.
how they feel better as a result
Yeah,
of things.
absolutely.
What part does the patient's own insight play in all of this?
Kind of the two parts is if someone's on something like diazepam, is very addictive and it would lead to the patient just being asleep most of the day.
Yeah.
So you can't engage with that person in terms of trying to find out what needs to happen for them to be discharged, what's the core of the problem. Equally, someone would be prescribed an antidepressant and after a week would say to the doctor it's not working. So then the doctor would, can I have another one? So the doctor would change it. And these medications take 6 to 8 weeks to begin to be effective. So that's kind of what I meant by that.
No, I don't think I quite understand that. To have another go at explaining that to
The
me.
second-
I mean, what I'm getting at is the patient voice is something that
Yeah, it's certainly
we should
valuable.
consider.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
Treatment, isn't
Yes,
it?
it is absolutely.
And medication.
Yeah.
You're not suggesting that they shouldn't have input.
No,
I think,
absolutely
into
not.
medication.
No.
But you think sometimes I don't want to put words into your mouth. That sometimes doctors were too compliant.
Yes.
With
Yeah.
the wishes of
Yes,
the
my
patient.
feelings were is that the doctor's the expert and that they would have more knowledge about what works with certain kind of conditions and symptoms.
Yeah.
And something like an antidepressant does take 6 to 8 weeks to start working. So to change it every week because a patient's saying it's not working, can I have another one? That's an abdication of responsibility of the consultant, I feel.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of overuse of medication, you give an describe an event in your statement, first statement of paragraph 54, where you describe one doctor at the Christopher unit, so this is in the very early days, telling you the ideal patient is one medicated to just above a coma.
That's right.
Did you ever escalate that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Who to?
The ward manager.
What was the outcome?
That particular consultant would often say things that were appalling. He would say he didn't mean it. It was just something he did. It was just the way he was, which I didn't accept. It was just a terrible... I used to think if they're the things he's saying, what else is he actually thinking that he doesn't think he can say?
Did you ever have concerns about particular members of staff using sedation as a means of reducing workload, particularly overnight?
No.
The concept of which you've already explained was one that concerned you and you escalated it, but the concept of medicating to just above a coma, was that something you saw in practice on other wards?
It certainly happened at Worley Hospital when I was doing my nurse training. There was one of the wards where people had been at Broadmoor Hospital and been stepped down to one of the wards there. And each morning there was just a big tumbler and a concoction of different liquids poured in. And it was, so certainly there, but not EPUT on it.
Not at NEPT or EPUT?
No.
Do you ever recall receiving a complaint from a patient on Finchingfield about excessive sedation?
I don't recall, but again, that's not to say that it certainly didn't happen and that patients did feel excessively sedated.
The patients did feel.
Yeah.
So you're aware that patients felt that?
Yes, yeah.
Do you consider oversedation to be an abusive position
Yes.
and degrading to patients?
Yeah, absolutely.
You describe safeguards, I think, in place in relation to rapid tranquilization, which is something different.
Yeah.
Do you consider that there were insufficient safeguards in place around sedation and over-sedating patients?
It's difficult to answer, I'm afraid. Yeah, I don't know.
What about systems in place to monitor whether staff were over-sedating? Was that being monitored? Were there systems in place?
Not specific staff. Each ward review, they would look at the medication card and see how many times, it was called PRM medication, was given. There'd be a combination of it being given by staff or asked for by a patient. Sometimes patients wanted extra medication if they were in distress.
And you say you recall that patients felt over-sedated.
Yeah.
Would a record have been kept of those patients making those complaints?
Yeah, any conversations that we had with patients would be written up by that particular nurse in the nursing notes.
And would they be kept under review if you suddenly got a number of patients?
Yeah.
And then what would happen?
We'd speak to the doctor in the ward reviews. And I would say the doctors on Finchfield were good at listening to the patient's view on that type of thing.
Just moving on, if I may, to staffing.
Mm-hmm.
Again, Finchingfield ward, you talk about 4 members of staff, I think 2 qualified and 2 unqualified, you say. This is paragraph 20 of your witness statements. What do you mean by unqualified? What do you mean by unqualified?
Support workers.
Because I think you said you didn't really distinguish between the different grades,
No.
because I think you said people were there to help people.
Exactly, yeah. The qualified were qualified nurses and the support workers had no specific qualifications for the role.
And what kind of responsibilities did the support workers have?
general to be around helping patients in terms of how the ward worked, menial tasks like helping with making beds if the patients weren't able to do that, keeping the areas clean. That was kind of the basic task, but the personality of the person would make a massive difference to the patients as well. They'd always spend time with the patients. They were generally the ones that would be in the day area and be visible for the patients. And I don't think the patients often knew the difference between, because we didn't wear uniforms back then.
What training did those support workers have?
I think that some of them did MVQ courses. You certainly didn't need a qualification to get the job on the ward, but they did all the mandatory training that's required of them and MVQ courses in care.
And who was responsible for supervising them?
The qualified staff. Sorry, the nursing staff. Yeah.
You mentioned having no particular problems with staffing on Finching Field Ward, but you talk about understaffing at the lakes, I think.
And on Gallywood Ward,
And on Gallywood Ward. Yeah. And you describe bank and agency staff. Yeah. What's the practical difference between bank and agency staff?
Bank staff will generally... a regular member of staff can do extra hours on the nurse bank, and that's generally what we would use. And also bank staff would have to be interviewed by the trust to be employed as a bank member of staff, whereas an agency staff will come from an agency outside of the trust.
So bank were employed by the trust,
yes.
Agency weren't?
Yeah.
And was there a particular process which the trust used, as far as you were concerned, to fill gaps with bank staff before going to agency staff?
Yeah, I think I can only speak for Finching Field Ward. Is most of our shifts were filled up with staff that wanted to do extra hours. And on the occasion we couldn't fill that, we had the numbers of different bank staff that we would phone up and say, can you do this shift? And then there was a bank kind of administrative sort of place where we would phone up and say, we've covered this shift. If we couldn't cover a shift, they would then try and phone around to get the shift covered for us.
So it would be overtime, followed by bank, followed by agency?
Yeah, there was no overtime.
No, I mean, you said extra hours, people doing extra hours.
Yeah, on bank.
On bank?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And then if they couldn't be filled, then you'd have to ask the clinical manager for permission to go to an agency to get staff in.
Can I ask about the impact of bank and agency staff? And it may be that the answer is different for the two of them from what you're describing. So what impact does filling gaps with bank staff or agency staff have on the quality and frequency of observations, or the engagement that you've already described to us, or empathetic connection between staff and patients? How does that play out on the ward?
On Finching Field, like I said, the majority of the staff would do bank as well. So in essence, it kind of wasn't much difference to the patients. They didn't know that person was doing an extra shift or whatever. And if we had a bank member of staff that was really good, we would keep asking them to come back. So then they would get to know the patients on the ward. In terms of agency staff, we didn't have much use for them on Finching Field, but my impression when they came was they were there to do the hours and had no real interest in anything other than finishing the shift.
And I think you'd refer to understaffing at the lakes, which I know is later on. Did you have more agency staff at the lakes then?
Yes.
And you say that there is I don't want to put words in your mouth, a significant difference then in the care provided by agency staff to bank staff. Is that what I'm taking from this? Yeah,
both in terms of ability and interest, to be honest.
Can I ask you about transfers?
Yeah.
Something else you refer to in your statement. You refer to transfers, and I think again we're dealing with Finching Field mostly. You say the need would be determined by a doctor, and it would be based on clinical need. And in your experience, you say, this is your paragraph 23, it was usually when someone needed to move to a more secure unit.
Yes.
So it was the Christopher unit, I think, for the most part. Yeah. And you describe the process where two people would come from the Christopher unit. There would be a face-to-face assessment. Or not I mean, am I summarising, but tell me if I've got this wrong. And then you describe a tension, because sometimes the staff from the Christopher unit would determine that your ward was fine with the risk. You could contain the risk.
That's right.
And you consider that that came about because of really for a resource issue, because there came a time when the Christopher unit was really the only secure unit to refer to.
That's right, yes.
And I think you've already told us it was small. Would you say 6
At the
beds?
time, it was 6 or 7 beds, but I understand that over the years, it's grown. They've built an extra wing to it, so I think there may be 12, 13 beds there, I think. I couldn't be sure.
But at that time, it was small.
Yeah, it was.
And you say that then the only option would be to re-refer in due course.
Yeah.
But that, unfortunately, would be when something had happened, when
Yeah.
to use your words, when something bad had
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah.
To what extent, as far as you're aware, was this tension known to the senior management at the Trust?
Yes, it was known.
How do you know it was known? Can you tell us
Because-
how you know it was known?
Both myself and the manager on the other ward would feed back to Stuart McGough, the clinical manager, and say, this is the situation. We've got a patient here we feel needs to be in the Christopher unit. They feel they don't need to be in the Christopher unit. Can you speak to the equivalent manager?
So that was a case-by-case basis?
Yes, it was, yeah.
Did you ever escalate it as an overall and ongoing concern?
I don't think so, because it wasn't that frequent that we had to refer someone to the Christopher unit.
All right. Did it persist, though? Did that problem persist throughout your time there?
It would very much depend on the member of staff that from the Christopher unit that did the assessment. It felt like if different people had different thresholds for what they felt was appropriate.
And were you aware then, having escalated, of any attempt to address the problem? Bring the consistency in?
No, I don't remember anything being fed back.
In terms of the Christopher unit being the only secure place to refer people, when was that? Did there come a time when did that become the position?
At the time when I was on Finchleyfield, I'm quite sure there was 2 other secure units, one in Harlow called Shannon House, and I think Maypole or Cedar Ward in Colchester. And they did both close down, one and then the other, but I don't know what period of time that was over. And there was a new secure unit built at the back of Finchleyfield called Edward House. Again, I'm not sure when that was.
And in terms then of you being limited to the Christopher unit, was that suited to all high-risk referrals, or were there many people for whom it wasn't suited to?
So there weren't many people that we would refer. We did try to manage things on Finchleyfield. It was generally, if someone was a high risk, certainly of aggression, that would be the main kind of reason that we would refer to the Christopher unit, because they had links to the forensic services as well.
Picking up on your early answers, for example, about neurodivergent patients, and looking back now, and you've already given your answers about lack of specialist knowledge, and you candidly included yourself in that. Looking back now, was the Christopher unit perhaps suboptimal for certain types of patients, that you were unaware of that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Did this tension between transfers apply to other admissions or wards? You know, when patients were moved elsewhere?
No, because the patients that were moved elsewhere would be, say, if we had patients from other areas on Finchleyfield, which was quite frequent, when a bed came up on, say, Ardley Ward or the person's local area, we'd get a call to say, we've got a bed for that person now, can you transfer them?
So when they were going closer to home or something of that nature. And were those transfers ever delayed then by the lack of beds and resources available?
Yeah, sometimes we'd have someone on Finchleyfield for 2-3 weeks at a time. And then they'd go back to their local area, have a different consultant, different approach, different staff. So it was very destabilising.
And did you ever raise concerns about that?
Yeah, we did. We did often ask if we could keep the patient on the ward to finish their care and treatment.
You refer, I think, in your statement to those types of transfers being disruptive.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So you weren't raising concerns so much about the delay, but about the fact that there was this disruption in the patient's care?
Yeah.
All right. You refer to transfer decisions being doctor-led with little patient or family involvement.
Yeah.
Why was that the case?
Now, I think I'm referring there to a specific incident from where I worked in the community and I had a patient on a secure ward in Colchester.
We'll come back to that in a moment. In fact, everybody found out about it after the event.
That's
Is that the incident you're referring to?
Yeah.
All right. But in terms of then patients and their families to out-of-area transfers, were they informed about those? Were patients and families involved in that?
Well, I don't remember there being many. You mean out of area out of the trust?
Yes.
I don't remember there being many of them, to be honest, or any examples. But certainly if they were, the family should have been informed beforehand.
perhaps you would want to answer this question more generally, but it may be that you can link it to transfers. What was the impact that you saw of lack of family engagement in transfer decisions, for example, on the patient or on the family?
Right.
If the family weren't involved in the transfer decisions,
Yeah.
what was the fallout? What was the impact that you saw?
The decision was always made regardless of what the family or the patient felt. If there was a bed in the local area, then that was it. The patient was going there regardless. And of course, they should have been informed every time, and to my knowledge.
It may be that you can't answer this in relation to this passage of evidence, but in your experience, what was the primary reason for out-of-area placements? Was it bed availability?
Bed availability, yeah.
You explain at paragraph 14 of your second witness statement that when a patient was transferred, the care coordinator would be expected to be invited to the reviews on the receiving unit,
Yes.
and to be kept up to date on incidents or granting of leave, discharge planning, and so on and so forth. But in your experience, that didn't always happen.
That's right, yeah.
Did that apply to out-of-area placements as well?
Yes.
So the care coordinator should have been invited to
Yes.
those
Yeah.
reviews as well? And what was your understanding of the role and oversight of a transferring trust for the ongoing care of patients in a receiving trust?
I don't know, to be honest.
Can you help us with any of reasons, to the best of your knowledge, why care coordinators didn't attend the ward reviews on the receiving units?
A lot of the time it may have been if they was told last minute, because a care coordinator will have 5 or 6 appointments in their diary booked from the week before. So often it would be difficult for them to get to something if they've only got an hour's or a day's notice even.
And this is where I think in your statement you do refer to your experience for when you were a care coordinator on, and you talked about the patient that was moved to a secure unit without your knowledge,
Yeah.
without the next of kin being informed,
Yeah.
and you found out after the event.
Yeah.
Did you complain about that?
Yes, I did, yeah.
Can you just give us a time period for that?
That would have been probably within the first 2 years that I was at Malden Community Mental Health Team. So whatever that was, 2009 maybe, 10, something like that.
Did you receive any feedback from
No.
that complaint?
No.
You also explain in your second witness statement that there are different processes in place for communication with a care coordinator after a transfer of a patient, and it depends on, or it's determined by whether they went to North Essex-based facilities or South Essex-based facilities. And if it was a previous North Essex facility, then you could follow progress better because the records would be on the Carebase or Paris system.
Yes.
I understood this correctly.
Yeah.
But if a patient is transferred to a South Essex, what was previously a SEPT facility, it was still the use of System 1,
Yes.
which was a different system.
Yes.
So you couldn't get information.
No.
Until how recently did that persist?
I'm pretty sure it persisted until I retired.
So when you retired in 2024, there was still this anomaly between the two systems.
I think so, yeah.
And it depended literally on where you were sent.
Yes. Yeah.
So if you're in a North Essex facility, everybody could get better information about what's happening.
Yeah.
All right. Can I ask you about staff attitudes? You explain in your witness statement, first witness statement, paragraph 39, that you'd heard you'd heard something of difficulties with staff attitudes during the courses that you taught. Is that the training that you've already talked to us about? So what period of time are we talking about that you'd heard about difficulties?
It's kind of throughout the time I was the control and restraint instructor. There was lots of space within those 4 days of training, or 2 days refresher training, where staff would sit down and just talk about their own areas. Sometimes we would encourage that as part of the course, but sometimes it would be during breaks and stuff like that.
So is it a kind of keeping one's ear to the ground?
Yeah.
And you said you did training, I think you said, till about 2015.
Yeah.
And what kind of things were you hearing then about staff attitude?
Basically, it was more to do with the attitudes of their managers. I think that predominantly people felt overwhelmed, they felt bullied, they felt that their voices weren't heard. And it's difficult because in those kind of scenarios, those people tend to be the ones that speak up. So the ones that kind of were okay, you probably didn't hear from. So it could have been, it's a difficult thing to assess, because if someone's not happy at work and they've got a forum where they can talk about it, it doesn't mean that there's no corroborating evidence, so to speak.
So you were
It was
more
a
like...
place where people could let off steam.
So you were hearing about the bad rather than the good?
Yeah,
you'd say?
yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
You say you didn't have so many staff issues on Finching Field because after the high turnover you recruited people that you thought worked well in that environment. But you've already explained, and I said I'd come back to it, that when you first arrived there was an issue because staff would often be in the office with the door closed.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And you insisted that the door remain open?
Yep.
That one person would stay in the office, but all of the others should be out on the wall?
Yes. Yeah.
But it didn't sit well with the staff?
No.
What was their issue with it?
I think the issue was they were having to engage with the patients. I don't think it was something that a lot of them wanted to do. They weren't happy at work.
Can I ask you about this? Because this arises in relation to your nursing model, which you described as existing staff being resistant to and not enjoying. Is that a case of learned behaviour? Was it a case of actively not wanting to do the things you're suggesting? Or was it just because they had been led to expect a different thing of how they should work? What do you attribute that sort of resistance to these changes?
I think there's some learned behaviour. That's the way it always was, is part of it. And also, the hardest part of working on a ward is engaging with the patients. It's very emotional, it's very draining, and it's very difficult. And some people either didn't want to do that, or they had enough of doing that, and they're kind of just becoming closed. And by shutting themselves in the office with their colleagues, it felt safer for them. And I was asking them to break out of that, which was resisted.
So it was more really to do with their willingness or their personality themselves?
Yeah. It was the individuals,
Individuals, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, because you then go on to explain that senior management introduced this concept of the PET time, the patient engagement time, where for 1 hour a day, staff phones would be off, the office door would be shut in the right way with the staff on the patient side, and staff were to dedicate their time to patients. And you say quite clearly you think that was the wrong way round. We should have a dedicated paperwork hour and the rest of the time the staff should be out. Does that mean then, with this PET time, with this hour PET time, that for the rest of the working day, staff were able to use their personal mobile phones?
So it wasn't their own phones, it was the office
The office phone?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, my argument was, if you're not engaging with the patients, what are you doing with your time?
Right.
You know, so I told my staff to ignore that completely and carry on doing what we were doing.
When was it introduced? Do you remember?
It would have been towards the end of my time on Finching Field, I think.
And who was responsible for determining that 1 hour patient engagement time was enough?
That was just something that came down to us.
Did you yourself, particularly in the beginning, observe staff failing to engage then with patients?
Yeah.
Did you observe instances of staff sleeping on observations?
No.
You may have just answered this, but so I'm clear, did staff carry and use personal mobile phones during a shift?
They weren't stopped from carrying them. I honestly don't think I even had one at that time. I was a bit late to the party with that, so I don't see it was a big issue at the time. And I remember one time someone had put something on Facebook to say handover's boring or something like that. So they were obviously using their phone and they got in trouble over that. But I don't remember it being having to tell people, get off your phone. It was certainly on Ardley Ward, it was an issue.
On Ardley Ward?
More so,
the Lakes?
Yeah.
So we're 2014 to
Yeah.
2016.
Yeah.
At times when you witnessed this lack of staff engagement, did you ever observe patients looking after each other?
Yes. Yeah, patients, there was always a big affinity on the ward. I think because it was generally a reasonably good atmosphere, if you can have one in those types of places. And there was a lot of time that patients spent with each other. Yeah,
But,
definitely.
sorry, just to make a distinction, so patients looking after patients anyway because of the atmosphere, but did you ever observe patients looking after patients because there was no one from
No.
staff to do
No,
it?
I don't recall an instant of that. No. You would get patients come to you and say, so-and-so's upset, and things like that, and then that kind of thing.
We have touched on some of the differences between Finchingfield and Gallywood. And in your statement at paragraph 41, you used the phrase, a distinct divide.
Yeah,
And Gallywood was managed by your colleague, Rama Saibon.
yeah,
And you said you tried to foster a general atmosphere of positivity, but you felt isolated
Yeah.
because she had been in post for years.
yeah.
Put shortly, what were the differences then in yours and her management styles and approaches?
In terms of, obviously I've not worked for Ram, so it's difficult to say how it felt to work there, but having gone on the ward, and it was quite a dreary place. There was almost every time one of us went to Gallywood ward, the office door was shut and a lot of the staff were in the office. There'd be times where we'd phone from Gallywood ward for something, get no answer and go over there and find staff in the office. There was a general kind, and you'd see queues of patients queuing up at the office door. It just felt so wrong to me, to be honest. It didn't feel like a place that people could be cared for in. And again, that's not saying they weren't nice people. It's just the way the job was done there was very different to the way I believed it should be done and the way it was done on Finchingfield.
Can I ask you about some of the specific differences, if there were any? How did their approach to self-harm differ, do you know?
Yeah, it was very much a case of increasing observations and removing items, stripping people's rooms.
So that was what you described as you thought the punitive approach.
Yeah.
What about their approach to level 3 observations?
They would almost always have somebody on level 3 observations, sometimes 2 people, sometimes 3 people.
And how were the fact that there were differences overseen and managed?
I think more or less every morning, myself and Rama and the manager of the day hospital would have a meeting with Stuart McGough in the mornings, and any issues that we had to bring to him, we would. How issues on Gallywood were managed, I wouldn't have been privy to.
But, sorry, it may be my fault in the way I asked the question, but were there any concerns about the fact that the two wards were doing things very differently?
I don't know. We just carried on doing the way I thought it should be done.
And given that there were different approaches, it would appear from the two wards, were you ever given clinical input for the correct approach for individual patients?
No.
Were you ever concerned on Finchingfield that your approach might not work for a particular patient's risk profile?
No.
You've talked a lot about the engagement, the need to understand the patient's motives in doing things and to consider behaviours, the cause of behaviours. There must, however, still have been occasion when behaviours were very challenging.
Absolutely, yeah.
Were there not occasions when you had to use physical restraint, where discussion and conversation was not the answer?
Absolutely, yeah. And that was one of my reasons to become a control and restraint instructor, because I wanted to make sure that where I worked, we did it the way it should be done. And to therefore the staff could be confident in me, because I was always tried to be if the alarms went off, I always tried to be the first one there to make sure I kind of led how it went. And our approach was very much, if you had to restrain a patient, the whole incident wasn't finished until you could sit down with that patient. Back in the day, you'd have a cigarette with them or whatever, and explain why you had to do what you had to do, making sure they were okay, and that there were no hard feelings, and they could carry on trusting us. Because I think if you just be physically restrained by somebody is awful. And certainly if you're distressed, or if you're a female being restrained by a group of men, and for them just to be left is just the most abhorrent thing. So we was very, very big on making sure that the person felt okay afterwards.
Thank you.
If there were differences in the way you were doing things on Finchingfield as opposed to Gallywood,
Yeah.
are you aware of this having any impact on patients as to whether in terms of consistency, whether they were concerned that there was a lack of consistency about how they were being treated on Finchingfield as opposed to others on Gallywood?
I know there were occasions where, due to the amount of observations on Gallywood, and we had a bed, we would take somebody who was on level 3 maybe, and they would be very clear about how it felt different. And we would often get those levels of observations reduced before they were transferred back to Gallywood. So it would be anecdotal from patients about how it felt.
I'm going to, move on quite quickly, so I'm conscious of the time.
Sure.
Can I just ask you about risk assessments, which you deal with at paragraphs 42 and 43 of your first witness statement, and you deal with your the model there, and you talk about the risk assessments being collaborative, and you talk about the, you say there's a general attitude from the trust towards health and risk assessment was focused on paperwork being up to date, with the emphasis being on audits.
Yeah.
You describe the big yellow incident form books having to be filled out, and you say the forms seemed pointless because you never received any feedback in relation to the incidents. You refer to no one from risk management coming back to you about them. I'm summarising. And can I ask you this? How were incidents then reviewed or escalated? Do you know?
Yeah, so they were big, this size sort of books,
Right.
sort of triple copy, carbon paper, whatever. So if there was an incident on the ward, say somebody had self-harmed, or if there had been an altercation between patients, or a member of staff had been verbally abused, or even if a table had broken or something, a form would be filled in. So I would come in the morning and I would review those forms, deal with whatever needed to be dealt with. So speak to the patient, make sure the patient was okay. If something needed to be ordered to be replaced, I would do that. And then what was supposed to have happened is I would send the top copy to risk management. To my mind, it was a filing exercise. They got that to file away. One copy went in the patient notes, and then that was it. Yeah.
So no learning disseminated from
No,
any of
it's
it?
just a case of, to my mind, it was about alerting me that something had happened as the manager, and then dealing with that. And if there was ever an incident with a patient, that would always be in the nursing notes anyway. So it felt having, so the extra bit in the back of the notes of the carbon paper was kind of replicated in the nursing notes.
Did you ever raise concerns about the fact you thought the forms were pointless?
No, I certainly didn't give them the gravitas that clearly the trust did, as I found out.
Yes, we'll come on to that in just a moment. Where were the books kept?
Just in my office on the ward.
Did you ever chase for any feedback?
No, because I didn't feel that feedback was this. It was very much informing them of what had happened, because on the form you'd put, the incident and then how it was dealt with. So it wasn't necessarily expecting feedback.
And
which is why I kind of thought it was just a filing exercise.
I understand. Yeah. And did this focus then on paperwork rather than care that you've described elsewhere in your statement? This presumably being an example of it. Did it manifest itself in any other ways?
I don't know. Certainly in my priorities when I was on the ward, it was making sure people were safe and okay, and that the incident book wasn't a high list of my daily priorities.
Discharge planning, sorry, I'm moving through quite quickly. You described discharge planning at the point of admission, which is at paragraph 15 of your first witness statement. Yeah. What are your views as to whether discharge planning at the point of admission is effective and appropriate?
It is to a degree if you're looking at the situation the person was in before they got admitted, but during admission other issues could come to light, and just being on an acute admission ward, I should imagine, is a trauma in itself. So people can develop anxiety and become distressed. So it's helpful to know from the beginning what needs to happen for somebody to be discharged, but other issues can come into play during the course of the admission.
What's your view as to the impact that early discharge planning has on patients?
It's difficult because some patients actually wanted to be in hospital. They'd asked to be in there voluntary, and sometimes found it safer and a better place to be than outside. So the thought of discharge then was quite frightening to them,
Okay.
I would say. Whereas other people who, because a lot of people change their minds when they come in, because they become involuntary and suddenly be told they can't leave for 72 hours, there'd be these locked doors and you have to see a doctor for this, and then say, well, I didn't know it was going to be like this, I want to go. So it was, early discharge is important, but you can't set dates in stone for people.
Are you aware of any patients being discharged against their wishes?
Not specifically, I don't think. Certainly more on Ardley Ward. When I was on Ardley Ward, it was very much, there were some patients that had been there for a long time, they developed very strong friendships, and they didn't want to be discharged.
Well, let me ask you this, was there a particular type of patient then, or demographic of patient, that would be discharged or would be upset to be discharged against their wishes?
Generally younger people who had difficult childhoods, difficult lives outside, often people who had been diagnosed with emotionally unstable personality disorder, for which so life is very difficult and chaotic. And on the ward there's a structure and there's people that ask, there's other people that feel the same, whereas I think before they come onto the ward they feel very isolated in the community. So then the thought of being taken away from that support group, it was very difficult for them.
Did you ever feel pressure to discharge as quickly as possible due to lack of beds?
I personally not, no.
Can I ask you briefly about allegations or incidents of sexual safety?
Yeah.
You have already talked about some of the pressures around a mixed ward. At paragraph 67 of your second statement, you say that you don't recollect reports being made to you of sexually abusive behaviour while you were the ward manager of Finchingfield.
Yeah.
Would a report have come to your attention as ward manager?
Yes, yeah. I mean, the fact that I can't remember doesn't mean that it didn't happen.
Okay, so there may have been one, but you just don't remember now.
I can't say that things like that didn't happen, no.
And we know that certainly when you started, it was a ward with a mixed-sex ward with a range of ages. Yeah. Are there any cohorts of individuals that you consider to be most vulnerable or at risk of sexual exploitation and abuse?
Yeah, it was the young females. The young females on the ward, yeah.
Were you ever made aware specifically of anyone being particularly vulnerable to sexual exploitation or abuse?
I can't remember, sorry.
Is that something that may have happened, but, but 20 years?
Yeah, yeah.
If you had been made aware of that, would additional measures have been put in place to monitor them?
Yeah, absolutely.
And if someone had disclosed to a member of staff that they'd been sexually assaulted on the ward, should that have been brought to your attention?
Absolutely,
as ward manager?
Yeah.
And what steps would have been taken to address that?
I would speak with the patient, get the family involved, the police if necessary, and obviously my clinical manager, because that stuff shouldn't happen.
Do you ever recall that happening?
I don't, I'm afraid.
Might it have happened?
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of additional measures to monitor them more closely, what would they have been?
I would make sure that when the nursing staff were allocated at the start of the shift, it would be a female member of staff that they were allocated, making sure there were sufficient females on the ward, and making sure everybody was aware of the sensitivity of it.
You also say you don't recall any specific risk assessment with regard to sexual safety, but you say it would have formed part of the vulnerability part of the risk assessment.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
You say that you're convinced more could have been done.
Yeah,
what?
In all areas of the management of the ward and the way the ward ran, absolutely. In terms of the level of understanding, level of knowledge,
And does that include in relation to sexual safety and
Yeah,
well-being?
absolutely.
What steps do you think should have been taken?
I think there should have been training for staff as to how to, in those situations. Yeah, I don't believe there was any.
Moving on again quickly to the question of leave and absconsions. In your second witness statement, you provide detail at paragraph 18 about arrangements for leave, which you say would be discussed in a multidisciplinary ward review, and that family members would be spoken to before the patient. You state that during leave reviews, care coordinator or representative from the community mental health team would be present, but unfortunately that would not always happen. Were leave decisions taken frequently then without patient or family involvement?
There would always have patient involvement. But yeah, I'd like to think that most of the time the family were involved, but I can't say for sure that was always the case.
What factors were considered during leave reviews?
The risk to the person and the support that they would be getting in the home environment, where a family would be present, if the care coordinator was able to visit. I tried as much as possible to have leave during the week as opposed to weekends. When I first went to Finchleyfield, it seemed to be accepted practice that people would go on leave at weekends. But to my mind, that was the wrong way round because there's no community support at that time at weekends. So we tried to change it to during the week.
I was going to ask you about that. Would you then consider that unescorted leave on a Friday is a high-risk decision?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
What about factors such as recent self-harm attempts? Would they be part of the discussion?
Yeah, that would all be part of the risk. Some people would be more at risk, I felt, being on the ward. It was the fact that they were on the ward that sometimes the risk was heightened. And it was the distress that may lead someone to self-harm. But that was all discussed. Because being a patient on the ward with another 19 people that are very distressed can cause kind of anxieties that you wouldn't get at home.
What was your view then of the continuity of care available during periods of leave? And this might have changed, of course, throughout your time working.
Yeah. It would depend if the care coordinator was available to visit. Because what we tried to do was have leave as part of the discharge process, not somebody wants to go on leave for a couple of days, then come back on the ward for a week. And there needed to be a purpose for leave, and it needed to be towards discharge. So you would involve the care coordinator with that to visit while they were on leave, to then report back, speak to the family to see how it was going.
And you would get feedback, I think you say?
Yeah, yeah.
Did you ask the patients if you could get feedback from the family? Did you get their consent for that?
I think we would generally, yeah. That would definitely be the process. And I think they would understand, because we would try and explain as much as we could to the patients what the processes were, and that would have been part of it.
You also refer to the importance of communication between, as you say, the community and inpatient teams. With out-of-area patients, how was that communication expected to operate between the Home Trust's community team, if you like, and the inpatient out-of-area trust?
Yeah, it was really difficult. It was basically by phone call, really, or email sometimes. You try and find out what ward the person was on, then you try and find out when the ward reviews were, hopefully get given a time for it, and then you drive down to Basildon. And frequently I went down there and the review had either finished or it had been postponed. It was really poor in terms of the patient's continuity. Yeah.
Did you observe out-of-area patients slipping through the gaps?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And who would maintain overall responsibility then during periods of leave?
In terms of...
For the patient's care?
The ward.
Yeah,
still,
the ward.
Yeah, still the ward, yeah.
Again, I'm going to move on quickly. Can I ask you a little bit about clinical records? I think you explained that when a patient was admitted to an inpatient unit, the paper records would be created. I mean, we're going back now some time, aren't we, with your evidence? But any existing file would have to be requested from the records department, which could sometimes take a couple of days. Because this is the beginning. Is this when you're Christopher unit in Finching?
Yes, yeah.
Does that mean that sometimes people were being assessed on admission but without full access to records?
Yes.
How often would that occur?
Certainly if people came in during the night or weekends, yeah.
And I think you also explain, and we've picked up on it with some of the transfers, that if a patient was coming in from a SEPT service, there'd be no access to notes because they were using System 1.
Yes, that's right.
You also explain that paper nursing notes were filed separately to medical notes.
Yes.
And you don't recall a doctor ever requesting to see nursing notes?
No, maybe sometimes if they had a report to do, but certainly not as general, because it was expected that the nurse would feed back to the doctors what had happened.
So that they would be reliant on others to provide them the
Yes.
information rather than seek it out
Yes.
themselves.
Yeah.
What impact do you think that had?
I think in a way it was not particularly negative, because as a nurse you were able to tell the doctor everything you felt you needed to tell them, whereas I think if they just looked in the notes you wouldn't be convinced that they would maybe understand everything, or they might pick and choose certain things.
So you weren't concerned that doctors were making decisions without the relevant information?
No, I think it was more comprehensive, because before each ward review the nurse would give a rundown of how the patient had been since the doctor had last seen them.
Slightly separate question. Did agency staff have access to clinical records?
Yeah, because they would have to write nursing notes the same as anybody else.
And what about records, again, for out-of-area placements where systems may have been different? What was your experience of the access?
The most you could ever hope for was the discharge summary, to be honest. You didn't get any up-to-date stuff in between.
You've given evidence, I won't ask you questions about it given the time, about Carebase and Paris and the instability of both of those systems. But can I just ask you more generally about records? Are you aware of any instance where records were allegedly fabricated by staff?
I don't know about that, but I'm certainly aware that records were copy and pasted from day to day, because that was very clear from when you're in the community and you're looking how the person's getting on the ward. And then there would be cases where somebody's records were copied and pasted onto a different patient's record as well. It was unusual, but it certainly happened.
I was going to ask what impact that had on the quality of the records, but you perhaps answered that, because if you've got the wrong person's information...
Yeah, it's appalling.
It's appalling. Were there any barriers to staff speaking out? So when you discovered the cut and pasting, for example, or when you discovered someone had the wrong information in their records, were there barriers to staff speaking out about that?
I was always very vocal, so as far as I was concerned, there wasn't.
To what extent were staff, certainly on the ward, able to complete records contemporaneously?
Yeah, it was certainly possible, yeah.
Again, moving on to ask about patient and family involvement in care. You describe a balance, within your statement, you describe the balance shifting from what the doctor says goes to doctors advocating for their patients, and then to a latter stage, which the chair's already asked you about whatever the patient wants in order to reduce complaints. You've given examples of where you think, for example, medication was changed too quickly without time for it to settle in. What prompted the shift, do you think?
I don't know, because I'd never worked in that part of the trust before. I don't know how long that had been a prevailing factor, or whether it was because of a certain incident. I didn't know. I just very much noticed a difference. And
when was it then that the shift took place, do you think?
I don't know. I was working in the community in Malden, which was kind of the different end of the trust.
So it was when you were in the community?
Yeah.
What was in place at a systemic level, do you think, to ensure that patients' wishes were properly taken into account into decisions that they disagreed with, if that makes sense?
There was an advocacy, had access to advocacy, and I'd like to think staff would have advocated for them as well. Certainly on Finchinfield that was the case. I think less so on Ardley Ward.
So on Finchinfield you'd have advocated for patients?
Yeah, and I often would say to patients, you encourage them to complain, because often the things they were complaining about, there would be things that I wasn't happy with either. And so I was often directing patients to PALS to complain, or to
and
write to the chief executive and stuff like that.
would you routinely refer them to the advocacy services?
Yes. Yeah.
And were they able to obtain support, for
Yes.
example, from the independent mental health advocates?
Yes. Yes.
And were decisions escalated to ward manager level routinely?
Yeah. Yeah.
And as you say, they were told of their right to complain.
Yeah. Absolutely. I would make sure.
Encouraged.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
In terms of family involvement in care, you describe it at paragraph 55 as disjointed and
Yeah.
poor. At what time frame are you talking about?
Certainly
is
on
it-
Finchley, but I don't think it was any better on Ardley Ward.
So it was Linden Centre and the Lakes.
Yeah.
To what extent do you consider care and family involvement was encouraged and taken seriously then?
On the ward, I don't think it was a priority. I think it was a case of families were there to be informed of events, meetings, etc., not to be learned from and not to get information from. It was very much a one-way kind of street. It's only when I started working in the community that I just felt so ashamed in terms of the fact that how it had been, because there was a patient on the ward I'd known very well for on and off for a number of years, extensive admissions. And then when I became a care coordinator, I went to a house and saw a wedding picture on the wall, and it suddenly just struck me how much, this person has lived a life before they became a patient. And from then it just was a light bulb moment for me. It was, and I felt very ashamed of the way we'd not engaged with people more.
Obviously, there was policy and legislation in place where care and family involvement was encouraged.
Yeah.
What effort do you recall, and you may have just answered this question, what effort was made by senior management to assess whether or not on the wards staff were complying with the requirement to involve families?
I don't know. There was certainly no occasion where I was told this isn't good enough or you're not engaging with your families enough. I don't believe it was monitored.
Can you recall any particular instance? As I said, you've now worked in the community and realised, I think the word you use in your statement is it would have made a massive difference if you'd known a lot more about your patients.
Yeah.
Can you recall any particular incidents where information from family would have materially affected a patient's well-being or informed?
I can't think of specifics, no.
And presumably this need to involve families and obtain information from families applies equally to decisions about safety on the ward, leave, discharge,
Absolutely.
as it does in the community.
Yeah. I think we were so intent on getting to know the patient that we didn't realise we were only getting half the picture or two-thirds of the picture.
Well, I was going to ask you that. Why were families, carers and friends not systemically involved?
I don't know. It was when they came to visit, certainly we would sit down if they got any issues or anything, that there was no outreach to them. I think the community, the care coordinator would have had much more involvement with the families over time, so we would get information from them to inform us. And again, it was only because I didn't really know the area. I'd come from sort of East London way to work in Chelmsford, and I'd heard of these places that patients lived. And it's only when I worked in the Malden community I realised some relatives were having to travel 15 miles on public transport to get to see their relative at the Linden Centre. And the fact that we didn't welcome them, or did you have a nice journey, or do you want a coffee? Looking back, that's all things we should have done. It's just,
What specific changes did you affect yourself or observe being affected to family inclusion as a result of your experience in the community?
Me personally, where I had a caseload of patients, I would spend as much time with the family as I can, probably sometimes more time with the family than the person. Because these people are living lives. They're not numbers, or they're not a section number, they're not a room number. And it was only when I was in the community that whole thing came clear to me. So,
What do you then consider the main systemic issues or structural barriers are that make effective family involvement in inpatient care difficult to achieve?
I think they're very, very busy places. That's not an excuse, that's kind of an explanation. They're inherently chaotic. Things are changing all the time. I don't know, sitting here, what can be done differently. I couldn't honestly say.
I'd just ask you about serious incidents
Yeah.
now, please, which is a slightly different topic. You say at paragraph 59 that following a serious incident there was support for staff and patients. I think there you're talking about restraint,
Yeah.
because you talk about the evidence you've already given the chair that it's not over. You said, I think today, until you had a cigarette, but in your statement you said
Yeah.
until you've shaken hands
Yeah.
with the patient. In relation to restraint then, was there a formal procedure in place that explained how staff from different wards were to be deployed during incidents of restraint? Because I think you sometimes called from other wards, didn't
Yeah, no, there was someone you'd hear an alarm go off, and you could go to the panel, and then you'd go to 2 or 3 people. I never sent one person from Finchleyfield. I always say it's got to be a minimum of 2, because you need 3 or 4 people to restrain somebody. So I always wanted a couple of people from Finchleyfield to be involved, because I think we did it well.
So there was a procedure. Did it increase the pressure on the wards from where the staff
Yeah,
come?
it did. Yeah, quite often during the course of the day, we'd be attending alarms on the other ward. Yeah.
And at paragraph 59 onwards in your first witness statement, you describe your experience of the serious incident investigation process. Can I ask you this? Does that account primarily reflect your experience at the Linden Centre?
Yes. Yeah.
You say there was half day of root cause analysis training.
Yeah.
Who was that delivered to?
I think it was to managers.
And was that one-off training?
Yes.
Do you consider that was sufficient?
I think it's sufficient for me in terms of I was quite confident in the reports that I was able to make, to compile.
You say that you were surprised there was no serious incident response training, such as the use of ligature cutters, and people were expected, just to use your words, to handle it.
Yeah.
Did you ever raise that as a concern?
Yes, I did. And in time, that became part of the control and restraint training. Because as part of that resuscitation and the thing called the green bag, like an emergency bag with all the different equipment in it, became part of that training.
It may be an unfair question, but can you remember when that became part of the training?
It certainly wasn't at the beginning of when I used to do control and restraint, so I'd say maybe halfway through.
Halfway through your being the trainer?
Yeah.
In relation to serious incidents response training then, were all staff required to carry ligature cutters?
No.
You make reference, I think, in your statement just to being told where they were.
Yeah, they were in the office, yeah. Not the office, sorry, the clinic room.
And was training provided to all staff? By that I mean qualified and unqualified?
Yeah, because all staff were required to go on the control and restraint courses.
And basic life support?
Yeah.
What about intermediate life support?
No, as trainers we were trained in that. But
So the trainers were trained in
Yeah.
intermediate life.
yeah, I think it may have been something that staff could request to be trained in. I'm not sure.
What about training provided to bank and agency staff?
I think bank staff had to do mandatory training before their payroll number was triggered, before they could sort of come onto the ward. I don't know about agency staff. And bank staff would attend the control and restraint training as well.
Any other training you think staff should have given in relation to responding to serious incidents?
I think there should have been much more about de-escalation, about what should happen after the incident. The control and restraint course was very much a physical, hands-on, this is how you do it, and there wasn't enough emphasis given to how the patient feels or what should happen afterwards.
So that's restraint. What about other serious incidents? Any other training that you feel should have been provided?
I can't think of any.
Were you ever involved in having to deliver bad news to families?
Yes.
Did you have any training about that?
No.
In terms of incident reports, again, because of the time, I shan't go into detail, but in your witness statement, second witness statement at paragraph 74, you say you received very little update or learning from a higher level from some of the from any of the reports that
Yeah.
you wrote.
Yeah.
And you don't recall getting any feedback as to whether your recommendations were acted on.
That's right, yeah.
And in fact, you did, I think, a report, or you did a review of the case of Glenn Holmes
Yeah.
in 2012,
Yeah.
but have only recently discovered that some of the recommendations were in fact
Yeah.
implemented over.
That's right, yeah.
Did you ever raise concerns about not getting any response to your reports?
No, no.
Were you provided with any training on how to engage with families, friends and carers during the writing of those reports or the review? Were there updates or learning disseminated to staff from other incident reports or root cause
I
analysis?
think over time, as part of a trust newsletter, there would be a section of learning from seriously untoward incident reports, but I don't know when that came in, but they certainly did come in.
Came in later on?
Oh, definitely, yeah, yeah.
How do you consider then that learning was embedded or put into practice?
I don't think it was.
In terms of writing the reports, do you consider you had sufficient time to write the ones you were asked to do alongside your clinical duties?
Yeah, I would always do them at home.
You do them at home?
Yeah, yeah.
Were you given the time to do them at home?
I just did them at home. Yeah, it wasn't something you were paid for. It was just something that
You just did them?
did, yeah.
So you did them at home in your own time?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I ask you very briefly then about the serious incident report that you wrote in relation to the case of Benjamin Morris,
Yeah.
Ben Morris? We've already touched on the fact that you wrote that report following his death just after Christmas in 2008. You know, I think, that his mother is a core participant
Yeah.
in this inquiry, and she's given evidence
Yeah.
to the inquiry already. And your evidence at paragraph 69 of your first witness statement, to use your own words, is that you received some pushback
Yeah.
from your manager, Stuart McGough, who told you that Rama Saibon, who you've already referred to, was unhappy because it didn't paint Gallywood Ward in a good light.
Yeah.
When were you told that?
It would have been after I've written it. I can't say when specifically. I'd had feedback from a previous report that I'd done as well, from a service manager, to say I'd been very harsh on his team.
Sorry, you said previous...
I'd had a previous report that I'd written, a case in Harlow, where a service manager I'd seen at a meeting and said to me he was unhappy because he felt I'd been very harsh in the report.
Now, I won't go into detail because it's in your witness statement at paragraph 70, but you were very angry about what had happened to Ben Morris, weren't you?
Yeah, the issues that were in the report I'd been raising for months, to be honest. There were quite a few incidents that happened on that ward over a period of time that I was on Finchinfield ward. Yeah, and the issues hadn't changed.
Are you aware of anyone else who wrote reports feeling similar pressure?
No, I didn't have any contact with anyone else that wrote reports.
And do you consider that the pressure was linked to this culture that you've described of prioritising the image of
Yeah,
the trust?
I do, yeah.
Did you raise any concerns with senior management following the death of Benjamin Morris?
There was a lot of staff on Finchinfield that were very unhappy. Two of them had been involved, I think, with Ben before. So, yeah, I did raise it with Stuart McGough, yeah.
You attended the inquest with Ben's mother.
Yes.
You also explain in your second witness statement that you were then replaced on Finchinfield.
Yes, that's right.
You were moved to do administrative work and audit work, in effect.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about the comment from the director of nursing who said that they'd had high hopes for you and you
Yeah.
took it to mean that your career was over.
Yeah.
You consider that following this report, and I'm moving quite fast because I'm mindful of the time, that there was a series of events that leave you feeling punished for writing what you think was deemed too negative a report.
Yeah, and generally, I think at the period of time we had, I think I said before, 3 patients on the ward with early onset dementia, and I was very vocal about how I felt that was wrong and something these people needed better standard of care in a more appropriate place. So I think in general I was a thorn in the side, I guess, and guess difficult to manage, I would say, and not afraid to say what I thought to people at various levels.
You were subject to disciplinary reaction in relation to the yellow incident form books you've told us about.
Yep.
Can you help us? What time period did the conduct that was the part of the disciplinary action, when did that relate to? When was it said that you hadn't been dealing with the yellow incident forms?
I thought it was somewhere between sort of January and March.
2009?
Yes, yeah.
Sorry, which year?
The time period when I wrote the report.
So you wrote the report at the beginning of 2009?
So I think it was sometime after that.
When did the conduct, do you know when the conduct for which you were disciplined first came to the attention of the management?
No. I remember coming into work one day and someone said, "Oh, risk manager have taken all your yellow books," and I actually thought, great, that's where they needed to go anyway for filing. And it was quickly after that I got told I was going to be disciplined.
What was the final outcome of your discipline?
Final written warning for 3 years. Yeah, and then moved from Finchinfield Ward. I think the phrasing, it was putting staff and patients at risk, which obviously was devastating to me because I spent my whole time, making sure that didn't happen.
Was the move from Finchinfield Ward expressly stated to be as part of the disciplinary?
No, I was told I needed a break from the ward and that I was going to be doing...
Who told you that?
It was the area director. Then I was replaced on Finchinfield Ward by one of the charge nurses from Gallywood Ward, which, again, I found difficult.
You were then moved to work in the community.
Yeah.
Can I just ask you a couple of questions, please, about assessments in the community? At paragraph 5 of your witness statement, you say that assessments could be classed as routine or urgent. Mm-hmm. Was there a protocol as to when they would be assessed as urgent?
Urgent would be assessment within 48 hours.
Were there any circumstances in which immediate assessment was mandated?
Yeah, we'd sometimes go out and see people the same day, yeah. We'd have meetings every morning with the team where we'd look at all the new referrals that come in and look at what everyone's day looked like, yeah.
Were there any measures that could be put in place pending an urgent assessment?
Sorry, I don't understand.
If you considered somebody needed to be assessed urgently, but you couldn't get there, would any measures be put in place?
No, we would always get there.
Okay. Yeah. Are you aware of any patients that came to any harm as a result of delayed assessments?
I'm not aware of any specifics.
In terms, having worked as a ward manager, I just want to ask you quickly about how inpatient wards and community teams, such as the crisis resolution home treatment team and community mental health team, work together. In your experience, having worked as a ward manager, do you consider you received sufficient information from the crisis resolution home treatment team, for example, about patients recommended for admission?
Yeah. Because they would always come in person. They were based at the Linda Centre, so they would come in person to the ward and there'd be a face-to-face handover, yeah.
Would teams and wards contact each other then for input when carrying out assessments?
Yes, yeah.
You do refer, however, later on in your evidence to a tension between, or you say that communication between inpatient units and community teams was never without its issues.
Yeah.
And you've provide an example, I think, from 2023 when a colleague left a discharge planning meeting in tears and the meeting continued in her absence. Yeah. Did you ever report or escalate that incident?
Well, the manager of the team I worked in was part of that meeting.
What was the nature of the tension then between inpatient and community teams?
It would generally be a disagreement about discharge, because the inpatient wards, certainly when I last worked, were very few beds available. I had somebody who was on a community treatment order waiting 6 weeks for a bed where he should have gone in straight away. So the inpatient wards are very much wanted to discharge people, but from the community side it had to be a safe discharge, and I think because of the community, the care coordinator would have a better idea about what the person's requirements for safety were in the community, whereas somebody might not pose such a risk to me to stay on the ward, but they would still pose too big a risk to be in the community. And it was very much, and certainly the one that you referred to, that whole meeting, it was the way people were talking to each other. It was just terrible. It was, no collaboration whatsoever.
I think you described the approach as disjointed. Yeah,
at the very least. It's a lot of it is where people have worked on the wards that have never worked in the community and vice versa. And I don't think that helps. And I think where I'd done both for quite a significant period of time, I felt I had a good idea in that area. But there was one thing I used to bring up frequently was, could there be rotation amongst teams from the ward and into the community, so everyone had an idea what everyone else was going through.
I just want to, before we've only got a couple of minutes left, I think, I'd just like to ask you a little bit about complaints and, more to the point, culture.
Yeah.
While you were working. You've already given evidence that as time went on, you started to feel decisions were being made to appease patients and avoid complaints. Yeah. You've already explained that I think that what you were referring to the Linden Centre, or later on in the Linden Centre.
At Ardley Ward.
And at Ardley Ward.
Yeah, it was mainly Ardley Ward, yeah.
At paragraph 32 of your second statement, you say that staff could raise concerns about a patient's care and treatment to their ward manager. Yeah. Using a whistleblower policy. Did that ever happen to you when you were a ward manager? Did you receive those complaints?
No.
In terms of culture, you describe a general culture of detachment and superiority between senior managers and senior ward staff towards patients. Did that extend to dealings with the family as well, as far as you could see?
I'm talking about meetings that I attended, like staff meetings and areas, yeah. So.
Do you think that there was an impact of that culture on patient care?
The meetings I went to, and I have to say I went to them as infrequently as I could in the end, because I felt it was a waste of my time. I'd rather be with the patients and the staff. And the senior managers would talk about staff in a very derogatory way. It just didn't sit well with me at all. It was very superior. You wouldn't think they were in a healthcare setting or worked in a healthcare setting, particularly mental health.
Was your impression then that the culture of the trust made it difficult for individuals like yourself and other staff to affect change? Yeah,
because I've been thinking about it recently, is that a lot of the staff that kind of spoke up, like myself, didn't really have great careers. I would say I think those sort of people weren't the type of people, certainly not the sort of managers that were wanted. It was
you said that people that spoke up like yourself didn't have great
careers. No, they kind of didn't progress at all.
Sorry, do you feel that speaking up hindered your career?
Yeah. And to be honest, I think it was good. I don't think I would have been any good above dealing with patients on a daily basis, because that's what I wanted to do and that was what I was good at. So it kind of did me a favour in a way, but I do think that was the reason. Yeah.
You talk about, again, you've given examples of perception, you think, being important to the trust. And you talk, for example, about when a CQC inspection would be announced, that in fact work would be done to paint the walls.
Yeah.
I think you describe as farcical. How widespread were your concerns about the culture and the sort of superiority, the farcical response to CQC, and the very few lessons being learned after serious incidents?
I mean, my experience could only be from what I experienced on Finchley Field Ward in the community, and I ended up coming to the conclusion that I just need to do the best that I can for patients. The trust seemed to just get bigger and bigger and bigger, and I was less aware of who was who. So I just concentrated on doing what I could do on a daily basis to help people. And the teams I worked in were the same.
And that trust getting bigger and bigger, do you attribute that in particular to the merger?
Yes. Yeah.
You talk about the CEO of NEPT when you were working for NEPT having a domineering personality and that those he employed reflected that attitude.
Yeah.
Was that something that was felt, as far as you were concerned, throughout the trust?
Yes.
And the culture that you describe of we know what we're doing, the problem is down there.
Yeah.
Down there, do you mean the staff on the ground?
Yeah, absolutely.
In your view, did this culture that you're describing result in a defensive approach to patient safety incidents?
Yeah.
And to the internal and external investigations,
Yes.
as you've described?
Yeah.
Are you able to give any examples of the culture of blaming staff for systemic issues?
I can't think of specific examples right now.
Do you think the culture had an impact on staff retention?
Yeah, I think people were coming to work afraid of being in trouble, of getting in trouble, and I think they began to feel that the less they engage with patients, the less likely they are to be accused of doing something wrong. So, yeah, it had a definite effect.
Do you think it meant that it had an impact on patient safety insofar as it meant remedial action wasn't always taken in relation to systemic issues?
Yeah.
Did you raise concerns about the culture?
I did when I was a manager. When I stopped being a manager, like I said, my focus was just trying to help people on a daily basis.
Why do you use the words conflict-driven, arrogant and aggressive when you describe the management?
That was my experience of it. There was just no compassion at all from my experience.
Apologies, Chair, I'm just... I think that's it.
Those comments about senior management, did they apply specifically to NEPT senior management?
Yes, because I didn't really have anything to do with senior management when I stopped being a ward manager.
Thank you.
Can I just ask, before I finish, a question which I should have asked about the Lakes, about Ardley Ward, which is this. During your time at the Lakes, what activities were available to patients there? Do you remember?
Yeah, there was like a team separate to the wards that would come and do activities on the ward. I think they would do like a newspaper group where people would sit around and talk about current affairs. And I think there was a day hospital. There was some cool things that people could do off of the ward. I can't remember any specifics really.
Okay. Are you aware of any illicit drugs being smuggled onto the ward
Yeah.
at the Lakes?
Yeah,
Yeah?
it did happen, yeah.
What about bullying by patients?
I don't know. I can't think of any specifics. There was certainly a time where there was like a core group of patients that were very kind of comfortable on the ward, I think. But I wouldn't say it's bullying as such. Not that I remember well.
Did you consider that the environment at the lake, at Ardley Ward, was therapeutic?
No.
And I should perhaps have asked you this. At paragraph 103 of your first witness statement, we were talked about how you felt that you'd been moved on after writing the report, in the 7-day report for Ben Morris. You say it was not unusual for staff subject to disciplinary action to find themselves moved to other areas within the trust.
That's right.
What was your impression of why that happened?
I don't know. Certainly two of the staff that came to Finchinfield Ward came from the Colchester area following disciplinary. So I don't know why that happened. Yeah.
Do you know the kind of things they were being investigated for
No.
when they were being moved around?
No. I mean, what I would say is that they were very good members of staff on the ward, and I would say they were similar to myself in terms of not sitting back if we thought things needed to change.
So they'd also you described yourself as vocal. Would you
Yeah.
describe them?
Yeah.
That's all I'm going to ask for now. Chair, do you have any further questions for Mr. Ayres? Mr. Ayres, what will happen now is we have a short break
Okay.
to see if there are any other questions, I think for 10 minutes, if you wouldn't mind
Sure.
staying within the vicinity. So
Okay.
if we were to come back about 1:25.
Yeah. Okay.
Ms. Harris. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Ayres, there's just a few more questions to you for you. We won't be very much longer. The first is this. You have already given evidence about the 7-day report you wrote following Ben Morris's death at the end of 2008. You've already given evidence of how you went to look at the handles in Gallywood Ward. Yeah. You went back to start trying to remove them with your electric screwdriver on Finchingfield Ward. And you said that you were told you mustn't do that, you'd be damaging trust property, and it was a job for estates.
Yeah.
And you said initially that you thought that was a conversation you'd had with Stuart McGough.
Yeah, I can't be...
But then you said it might have been somebody else.
Yeah.
All right. You have also given evidence that after you wrote the 7-day report, you felt that you'd had, to use your words, some pushback from Stuart McGough. Now, might that have been somebody else that gave you the pushback?
It could be, yeah. It's just,
So it may not have been Stuart McGough?
No, I can't specifically. I know.
So are you, can I just break it up?
Yeah, of course.
Are you, what is your evidence about the pushback? Do you recall getting pushback?
Yeah, I may have heard it from the person that commissions the reports. I certainly heard it from Rama as well.
So you heard it from Rama, you think? Possibly the person that commissioned the report, but it might not have been from Stuart.
No, I mean, I have to say Stuart McGough was always very kind and very supportive to me.
Okay, so he was always kind and supportive.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. That was that one. I asked you some questions around sexual safety, do you remember? Did you have any training on how to deal with, first of all, any aspect of how to either monitor those who are vulnerable or deal with complaints made when you were on Ardley Ward?
No.
I asked you some questions around the completion of clinical records and whether or not staff were able to complete them contemporaneously. And I think you said they had the opportunity to.
Yeah.
Can I ask you one question further? To your knowledge, as far as you were aware, did nursing staff or support workers usually complete their records contemporaneously?
When I was on Finchingfield, certainly, yeah.
Were there times when you worked elsewhere where that wasn't the case?
Yeah.
So where would that be?
That would have been on Ardley Ward.
So they weren't contemporaneous on Ardley Ward. What was the situation?
It was where you'd come in and there'd be no report from the previous afternoon or something like that.
And what would you have to do in those circumstances? Would it be your responsibility to chase that up, or how was that
as
dealt
a charge nurse, I would, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and there were times when I worked in the community where there was no entry from the previous day on the ward, if I had a patient on the ward.
So if we understand your evidence correctly, Finchingfield Ward, the records were contemporaneous, and you say better kept.
Yeah.
I know those weren't your exact words.
Yeah.
Ardley, not so much.
No, I think that the care-based system was a lot easier, and keeping paper records, people were more likely to do it. I think people did struggle with the Paris system initially when it came in.
So that was part of the Paris system transition.
I think so, yeah.
And the community, again, you say there were gaps in the records.
Yeah.
Okay. You very candidly, different subject, you very candidly included yourself when we when you gave evidence about the lack of specialist knowledge, particularly in relation to neurodivergent patients back in 2006, 2007, around that time, or when you were at Finchingfield.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned later down the line the online training, the
Yeah.
Oliver McGowan training.
Yeah.
Did you undertake that training?
Yes, I did. Yeah, it was mandatory for everybody. Yeah.
Yes, but it was in terms of your departure.
Yes,
but
I
yes,
did,
and once you'd received that, did you feel that you were able better to address the issues that arose
Certainly,
in relation to neurodivergent patients?
Yeah, I mean, it was the tip of the iceberg. It was kind of a whole new thing for me, really. So there's loads more to learn, but it did open my eyes to it, yeah.
So did you consider it useful?
Yes.
But you say there was a lot more that
Yeah.
you could learn about it?
Yeah.
All right. Can I take you back, sorry again, to... No, we've done it. To the removal of items from rooms following self-harm. Now, you described the approach about taking the items of risk, I think.
Yeah.
Can I just ask you one question beyond that, which is if somebody had self-harm by ligatory,
Yeah.
what would your approach be, or what would the correct approach be as far as you were concerned? Would you remove any potential ligature item in those circumstances?
Yes, definitely.
So I'm thinking hoodies,
Yeah, yeah.
bedding,
Yeah, tights, that kind of
curtains,
things.
tights.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. You have already given evidence that your view that wards were not suitable for people with dementia. You already talked about how traumatic that was, both for them and for others on the wards.
Yeah.
What alternatives were there then for treating patients with dementia when in a crisis?
There was the Crystal Centre, which is next door to the Linda Centre, was a ward for people suffering from dementia on that ward, but because of the age of these people that were suffering with dementia, they were put on an adult ward as opposed to the... So it was due to their age as opposed to the appropriate care that they could receive.
So they were on your ward, which you considered was entirely inappropriate, given...
because they were under 65.
And finally this, we talked a little bit about over-sedation and the culture of over-sedation, and you dealt particularly with the question of over-sedation on Ardley ward.
Yeah.
Did you raise that with management?
Yes.
Who did you raise it?
Yeah, the ward manager.
And what response did you receive?
He will speak to the doctor. That was...
And did you get any feedback from
No,
that?
none at all.
That was the last you heard of it?
Yep.
All right. And on the question then of raising matters, you said at the very end of your evidence, when I asked you, had you raised concerns regarding the culture of the senior management and senior staff at NEPT and or EPUT?
Yeah.
Who did you raise that with?
Just Stuart McGough. We talked to him a lot about how I felt about how things...
So this was back at Finchingfield.
Yeah.
So that's 2000 and
Yeah.
between 2003 and 2009.
Yeah.
Have you raised concerns about the culture of senior management since in your more recent employment?
No, my recent employment, all my focus was just on the people that I was looking after. I tried to keep myself away from almost the other stuff, to be honest.
And did you get any response from raising that concern with
No.
Stuart McGough?
No. I think he was very good listener. So I think a lot of it, I was kind of, this is how I feel about things, but I wasn't necessarily expecting him to do anything about it.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. That's all the questions I have now. I'm just checking. Chair, do you have any further questions?
I don't. Thank you very much indeed. Can I thank you very much indeed for your
It's okay.
evidence? It's been very helpful indeed.
That's right. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, Mr. Harris.
That's right. Thank you.
And
Oh, I think, sorry. Could we come back again at 2:15? Thank you very much.
2:15.